being here. I know everybody's got really busy schedules. From a county perspective, our job is to look to the private sector, look to our other community partners and say, what are the needs? How can we work collaboratively to meet those? Or how can we get out of the way sometimes to let you do your thing and be more effective to continue to grow our economy? So I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank our elected officials. I look around, I know we've got lots of mayors and city council members and commissioners. I think lots of the members of our CDA and HRA boards are here. Again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. Also, thank you for setting policies and driving policy that allows and encourages this type of development to encourage the county and to continue to allow the county to develop. When we talk about development from a county perspective, housing growth really grew out of our long-range strategic plan. And so several years ago, county went around, we spent lots of time, I spent more time in basements and gyms, talking to the public, listening to stakeholders about what are our needs. And we got lots of feedback. But one of the things that we heard consistently over and over and over again was keep focusing on housing. There was other stuff too, right? Childcare, broadband. There was other things that they said, but from an infrastructure standpoint, what we heard loud and clear was keep leaning into housing. It's really important. It's important for not only for our workforce, but it's also important for us if we're going to recruit people back, even if they're not going to take a job here, we know that we can recruit people back who might keep a job in some other location. So, housing development is core in our long-range strategic plan from a county perspective. With that, I don't think I have any other notes other than I get to, one of the people that I get to work with every single day who I have no problem admitting is 10 times smarter than me and responsible for most of what happens is Amy Baldwin, and I'm going to turn it over to her. So thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Nick. Really happy to be on the team here. So to kick things off today, going to talk first, I'm going to go get my reading glasses because I'm older now. And I need notes to keep track of what I'm going to say. So, all right. So again, wanted to start with talking about some of the successes of the Big Build. And this initiative kicked off in 2019 here in this room. How many were here back in December of 2019? Hey, a good number, great. So we are really pleased to be here again and talking about successes. But as Nick already shared a bit, we work on things together and not in isolation. And housing isn't unique to that. So as we think about this framework of 4 strategies around Ottertail County, putting it on the map, so the work of Eric Osberg and our Ottertail Lakes Country Association, to really focus on bringing attention to Ottertail County. Again, we've had workforce challenges, things that we heard from our employers. There just aren't enough workers to support the growth and even the current workforce needs of employers. So within thinking about once those folks have Ottertail County on their radar, what do they need to live and work here? Housing being a key part of that. Also, as mentioned, broadband, childcare, things that are expected or needed in order to be productive and participate in the workforce. And then employer supports, we do talk a lot about how to, again, help our employers be better about recruiting, how to help them retain and keep those workers and make sure that we're supporting business growth and development in ways that we're able to. And then finally, welcoming communities and thinking about strategies to support our communities to be places that people feel connected and engaged and participating in local groups and boards and really keeping those vibrant communities that we have here in Ottertail County. So I just wanted to bring that broader framework back to our kind of forefront, because that is where this work started. So, and then focusing back in 2019, we launched the Big Build. And developed these 4 action areas that most of you have probably seen before if you've been engaged in our housing work. And those areas include increasing the construction of new housing, but really thinking about the various needs of population and income levels as we look at the new housing that's needed and built. Looking to build and expand partnerships with our development community, with our nonprofit partners, and our communities themselves to really collectively work on this issue. The third area, working to seek the funding. We know housing is not inexpensive to build. It's very expensive to build and has gotten even more expensive since 2019. So we look to attract that outside funding and leverage tools that are available to get those projects up and out of the ground. And then finally, being an advocate for securing those funding programs and just general support for housing initiatives at the federal and state level. And the state of Minnesota has launched a lot of new housing programs. I'm going to give a shout out to Jennifer Bergman, who's here, back of the room, waving her hand. Jennifer is leads the local government programs at Minnesota Housing now, the state housing agency. And that's a new team. I mean, we've been on 2 years, Jennifer, 2.5? 1.5. She's done a lot in 1.5 years and really rolled out new Minnesota housing programs that are geared for local government. So really a whole new arm for Minnesota Housing. We'll talk a little bit about those programs later in the program today. So we've reviewed these action areas and contemplated, do they still hold true today? And they do. So these are the same words that we used in 2019. And so we've affirmed to continue to do the work focused around these areas and others to be along with us. So, what has happened in 5 years? Well, we have built or substantially rehabbed as a collective almost 3,000 housing units across Ottertail County. And we did have a big audacious goal back in 2019 of 5,000, no secret there. We did not meet that goal, but it was really aspirational. I'm looking to some of the CDA board members who were in that conversation when that number was put out there, and we wanted it to be lofty. That was the goal. But what that has resulted is in over $700 million of new tax base throughout the county. So that number is big, and certainly not driven solely by the work that we've done. There's been a huge amount of private sector involvement and privately driven investment, but there has been a number of projects that we'll talk about later that really were spurred by the conversations that we were having, the demonstration of the need for housing, as well as the financing tools to help make a project happen. So, that $700 million includes, new apartment buildings, new single-family homes, a lot of new single-family homes, new affordable senior housing, new mixed-use buildings in several communities that have housing above and commercial on the main floor. Again, all driven by what those communities saw as needs, as well as opportunities that are unique to their own communities. So again, that $700 million, if we translate, we know that's a conservative number. That's based on conservatively the best data that we can pull without doing a really, really intensive data review. And that translates approximately to $10 million of new property taxes across the county. So really impactful work that everyone in this room has been involved with, and we know there continues to be need. So the work isn't ending. If you recall, also the big build was by 2025 was that metric date, but the big build isn't going away. The program, the efforts, the initiatives, they're not going away. So we're going to be continuing this work as we go forward. We just won't have that, maybe there'll be a new goal, I don't know. Maybe the board will decide to have a new goal, but definitely still have, now that we've been able to develop up some of the programs and resources, again, that we'll talk more about later today. So we also did pull a map, a dot map of where were those units built. So you can see throughout the county, they are in every corner, every township, every city has seen housing growth. And that we know where there continues to be more needs, but that is, I think, really just reflective of what those, where the growth has been. So, and they're not just dots though, and these aren't just ideas, these are real projects. So some of the photos here are just a few examples of projects that have advanced over the last few years. And we're gonna highlight a few of these in a deeper review about how they got done. So these were community partnerships, developer partnerships, financial resources from locally, the state of Minnesota, other sources to help make these projects a reality and see shovels in the ground in lots of different communities. So again, while there's been significant progress, there is still really significant need as we think about housing investment as it continues to the county. So we hope that everyone will continue to be partners on this work and get some inspiration from projects that we'll talk about a bit later on the agenda, and help leverage some of the resources that are available to help make those projects happen. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Nick.
Thanks, Amy. So the other luxury, I guess, I get this morning is to introduce our keynote. 10 years ago, I was almost to the day. It's kind of scary. I was brand new at Otter County, so new that I still felt like I knew what I was going to do and had a plan. And then within about a week, I was invited to attend a lecture at the University of Minnesota Morris by this guy named Ben Winchester. And all the plans that I thought I had coming into this new job were just shot to crap because of Ben's presentation. And he spent not the entire time, but a lot of it talking about demographic shifts and the rural rebound and what was going to be happening. And we had already encountered this and seen it a decade ago. We knew 10 years ago we could see it starting to happen locally, but Ben made it really, really, really scary. And so, and I don't even know if it was scary enough now that I've had the opportunity to live the last 10 years. But we also subsequently have spent a lot of time learning and gleaning information from Ben related to housing and what are the housing trends and how should we as a unit of government be supporting private sector. What do we anticipate seeing globally, but also in rural Minnesota. And so I want to, before I ask him to come up, this is a really cool video related to the rural rebound that really talks about kind of, again, the impetus was Ben's research and what has happened in Otter County related to the rural rebound and the efforts. So feel free in your spare time to, I don't know, I think you take a picture of it and then you can watch a video. Sarah, where are you? Where's my Gen Z that knows how to run this thing? And then next, I just want to thank Ben for being here and invite him on up to tell us about housing trends. Thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Hey, everybody. My name is Ben Winchester. I'm a rural sociologist with the University of Minnesota Extension. I think you know Extension is the 4-H people, right? Hands up if you were in 4-H. All right. I'm not. I wasn't. And I'm not in that department right now. I'm in the Department of Community Development, which in many ways reflects the new rural. We have been serving rural America for the past 100 and whatever odd years in Extension. And I like to say that we're the oldest decentralized organization in the country. We've learned to work remotely. We've learned to work collaboratively without seeing each other all the time. So really kind words here. It's been my pleasure to work with you all. You've run with this ball. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are. I'm going to review some of the materials around the brain gain, these demographic things Nick had talked about too, and just give an update on kind of where we see the data in 2025. We've got 2 new pieces, very exciting. I've only presented one piece once, which is kind of a new economic development tool using our cell phones to look at how our people travel, and you'll hear me talk about this. And then the second piece is we've got economists within Extension involved in looking at the economic impact or the return on investment on housing. If you're to make an investment in housing, how long does it take for you to get that money back when you have people that live there, spend money there, not just in that town, but in the region? Half of those people are bringing kids. Like, we have all these dynamics of change. What does it mean when we have a public agency investing in a private asset? I'm very sensitive to the fact that you're public officials, many of you, and you're being answered or being called to the question by your public folks saying, what are you doing in housing? Housing is a private asset. Don't tell me what to do with my house. That private asset is also a public good that nobody is responsible for. Nobody is responsible for all the housing in your town. The HRA is generally responsible for the Section 8 stuff, and you have a huge shining light on that. But ultimately, we do have a laissez-faire approach to housing. So before we get into the housing thing, we're going to talk here about the premise of my work. If you haven't seen me before, my name is Ben. I do research around what I call rewriting the rural narrative. And the premise behind all my research is the narrative we use to describe our small towns and rural places is terrible, especially the narrative that's being told about us from the outside. We don't have an ability to counter that negative narrative, that our best days are behind us, nobody wants to live here, the lucky few escape, your kids have to brain drain it out of here to be successful. It's not true. So you'll see the subtitle here is Speak Softly and Carry Statistics. I'm a data geek. My undergrad was in math and stats. I went to school at the University of Minnesota Morris. I grew up in Winona, though, and I thought Winona, 30,000 people, and I thought Winona was a small town. And then I went to school in Morris, and I was like, oh, this is a small town, Morris, right? 5,000 people. But then I realized that 5,000 people, man, 80% of the cities in the state are smaller than Morris. Every time there's a town with a radio station and a newspaper, there's 25 other ones that don't have a chance to write a narrative for themselves. So I am big on what kind of a narrative do we have about our community, and really the number one avenue I look to talk about where is your community going are all the newcomers. So I'm going to ask you, raise your hand if you are currently living in the town that you were born in. Maybe 6-8%. Raise your hand if you're in a town that you were not born in. Our towns are filled with people that are not from there. But the people that are from there or might have historical family, legacy, right? They have recognizable names, recognizable faces. But for every time there's one of them, there's 10 of you that are not from there. And are you given agency to call this place your home? Don't spoil it. So I do talk about there's a brain drain. 18-year-olds want to leave. True. It's not just rural communities that are dealing with this. Kids want to leave the metropolitan areas too. So brain drain, true, not just rural. We live in the middle of nowhere. I like this one because I'm going to play on this a little bit, but doesn't sound good, right? Some people want to live in the middle of nothing, but others, you want to live in the middle of something, right? So middle of nowhere, this gets characterized all the time. Nobody locks their doors. Everybody knows one another. Actually, you do lock your doors. North Dakota has the lowest percentage of door lockers at 44%, but it's certainly not that nobody locks their doors. So the Kellogg Foundation and others in the narrative space will tell you whenever you see quotes like this that include things like this, that's a sign of a lazy person that is working upon stereotypes to define what they think they're going to find in this town or what they think they see. So I'm going to talk about the very first chart I made. I was in Morris in 2002 working for the Center for Small Towns, and new census data came out, and of course there's a brain drain. And I wanted to better understand, who is really moving in and who is really moving out of our small towns. We can't just have this it's not just a one-way street. Talk to your city clerks. They know there's always water hookups being done. There's shutoffs and hookups being done consistently. So, meanwhile, here's Grant County. This is the first chart in Excel I made where Grant County, and from 1990 to 2000, their population was flat. If you're a negative narrative person, you would say they're stagnant. But I would say they're stable, right? Your narrative dictates kind of how you're seeing this, right? But more importantly, when you look at the changes over the past 10 years from 1990 to 2000, which populations got smaller? Let me try to find the dot here. Oops, oh my gosh. I knew this was gonna be an issue. So here we go, here's the brain drain, right? Grant County lost 43% of their young people. But then there was a gain in 30, 40, and 50-year-olds. And there were gains in 10 to 14-year-olds. And they don't move by themselves, right? 10 to 14-year-olds, oh my gosh. They're moving with their parents right here. So meanwhile, in my industry, in my rural development industry, in extension and all these other academic departments studying rural, like here is the focus, the brain drain and what it means for rural America. In fact, there's a whole book called Hollowing Out the Middle, the rural brain drain and what it means for America. And the idea here is the whole title of the book is Hollowing Out the Middle. The idea there is that when you lose your high school kids, that there's nobody else here. Well, I am showing a very consistent pattern of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s moving to rural communities, and this didn't start in 2000s. This started in the 70s. So I termed this the brain gain. There's been a consistent pattern of people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s moving to rural communities, 98% of all rural counties since the 1970s. And it's essentially filled up every home that we've got. The 90s really filled them up. So as an academic, right, we wanted to do interviews and focus groups. And so even in Nebraska, the panhandle of Nebraska, where there's like massive population declines, there's still gains in 30, 40, and 50-year-olds. And how can that be? How can you have gains in the population, but your numbers keep going down? You are fighting demographic destiny right now. The average household size has gone down a full person over the past like 60, 70 years. So even if you have a finite number of homes in town, you're just gonna have fewer people in your town because every house has fewer people. In fact, 58% of our houses right now have people, just 1 or 2 people in them. They're not filled with kids. You wonder why your school enrollments go down? Your homes are filled with people that don't have the ability to have kids in some ways today. It's an artifact. So there's a bunch of stuff here we're gonna get into. So we've been doing these studies in Minnesota, Montana, Iowa, North Dakota, South Dakota coming up, Nebraska, and we go out and we find all these new people. So raise your hand if you moved in the past 5 years. We would be finding you and asking you, why did you move? There's things called push factors and pull factors is an easy way to think about this. Like what pushed you away from where you were? And what's pulling you into the community you're moving to, right? So when we ask these newcomers, like, why'd you select this small town and rural place? The top 3 reasons that people give is number 1 was a simpler pace of life. It's like immediate access to recreation. I mean, we had people timing how long it took them to leave work, get home, hook up the boat, and launch it. And they're like 14 minutes. This is quality of life, right? Number 2, safety and security, which is especially high with people with children. And the 3rd top reason was the low cost of housing. That one's at risk right now. And I think, again, during the pandemic, when you work from a negative narrative perspective and you believe rural communities are dying, then the pandemic is going to reinvigorate us. And I would get reporters all the time call me and like, hey, is the pandemic going to rejuvenate rural America? Going to revive it? You know, like we're dead. Thank you, but we've saved ourselves. It's why our homes are filled. The pandemic did not renew a rural interest. It exacerbated an already high demand for rural living. And the only thing the pandemic did was exacerbated our home values because the demand was already here. So again, we work from the premise that we're full. Some people move for a job. I know, so economic development has shifted greatly over the years. When we talk about industrial recruitment, that is, there's different kind of waves of economic development. So traditional economic development is industrial recruitment. And that is, I'm gonna bring in a business. When I have a business in town, that's a reason for people to move here, right? Just for that job in my town. Industrial recruitment, hello, like 75 years ago. We are in small business entrepreneurship, we're in cluster development, and more importantly now, we are in resident recruitment. Like, stop creating jobs. We have these jobs we can't fill. Labor market becomes an interesting thing to look at now, because if you truly believe you have a labor shortage, without recognizing any of these other constraints, then you are doing something wrong. You're not paying enough, your community isn't attractive enough, there is some problem with you why you have the labor shortage, when in fact, there's nowhere for someone to live. I'm gonna hit this on the head every time. There is nowhere for people to live. So now, move primarily for a job went down. So this middle column here, oh my gosh, sorry. This middle column here is 2019. The study that we did here in Minnesota with this brain gain concept, the 30, 40, 50-year-olds, we interviewed them a year before the pandemic. We didn't know it was gonna be a year before the pandemic, but we did it in 2019. And then Montana, in the column on the right, is a year into the pandemic. So what are pandemic-related influences on rural migration? When we asked newcomers, did you move because you had a job or a job offer in that community? That went down even further. This used to be over 50% 20 years ago, and now it's at 41%. Now we're down to what, 35%? Just 1 in 3 newcomer households. And we look at households as our unit of analysis. 1 in 3 newcomer households are moving because they have a job or a job offer here. They might have a job in the next county over, the next city over, but it's not in that town. They're putting their home in one place. So, move primarily for a job went down even further. Makes sense, because the pandemic afforded an opportunity for employees to work wherever they wanted. And they did. And they exacerbated, again, the demand for rural living. Lived in the community before, excuse me, went up. So number one, just like you all raising your hands here, you're not from the community that you're living in. Just 1 in 4 newcomer households were from that community before the pandemic. 1 in 4. But again, if you're from that town, you've got like cachet, you've got the familiar name, the familiar face. But every time there's a newcomer household that you recognize, there's 3 others that you don't. And do you see them? You could be pumping gas next to your new neighbor and you'd have no idea, because we don't have opportunities for social engagement. We talked about welcoming, Nick did in that slide. So living in the community before went up though. This is for the first time. This one marker went up, and why did it go up? Any guesses why we think that percentage went up? I have the spoiler under it, but it's housing. How do you find a home to buy in a rural community when the homes are filled? You have to know somebody. Like, hey, I've always loved your mom's house. I know she's looking at moving out of it. We're going to take you out for supper tomorrow and we're going to get this done. 40 to 60% of home sales during the pandemic were not arm's length transactions. They weren't a stranger putting their house on the market and some stranger finding it. It was the, hey, your mom's house is nice. We had a story from a month and a half ago where a dentist, a guy went into a small town to fix his mom's house up, which was dilapidated, and as he was fixing it up, he chipped his tooth. So he went into the dentist's office, and in the dentist's office, he's like laying in the chair getting his teeth worked on, and the dentist's assistant is like, whose house are you working on? I don't recognize you, right? He's like, oh, Joanne's house on 7th and, Larpenter or whatever it was. And then she's like, oh, Joanne's house? Oh, I know which house that is. Like, why? What's going on there? Is she moving out? Like, she's getting all this information. Like, literally within 48 hours, that house got sold to that dentist assistant's son. How do you find a home to buy? You have to know somebody. You cannot look from the outside and expect to find a home in our rural communities. I work with the National Rural Education Association, and they're like, hey, we got be an educator in rural America. That sounds great. And then I did this with their board, like walk through this exercise, like, hey, Osceola, Iowa, there's a perfect job for me. And then I go to realtor.com or Zillow, there's nothing there. So I move on to the next job and see what that one's like. You want the advantage on resident recruitment, you better help people find a home. Period. And that home doesn't always have to be in your community. So I'm going to hit on this one last point. Have kids in the household. A lot of people think that newcomers moving in are just all the families bringing kids. Just half of newcomer households have kids. So every time, and newcomer households with kids are easier to see. It's like, oh, there's a new kid in my kid's class, and there's their mom. Like, hey, nice to meet you. You're new in town. I can welcome you. But every time there's a newcomer household with kids that you may recognize, there's now going to be another one you don't that doesn't have kids, and where are they? How are they seen? So I'm going to call it the brain gain. There's been a consistent pattern of people in their 30s and 40s, sometimes in their 50s and 60s, moving into all these rural communities, and this has been happening since the 70s. Meanwhile, these new people moving in, I would get asked, like, where are all these new people? They're not engaged in my groups. They're not coming to my council meetings. They don't care about this community. I'm like, oh, right. They're not coming to your meetings. They're going to theirs. And you don't know where these newcomers are spending their time. So rather than disparaging them, saying they don't care about your community, why don't we recognize where people are spending their time today? Becomes my concept here. So when we look across Minnesota, the type of nonprofits that people are engaged in, I know this isn't related to housing, but it is. What types of groups do we have in Minnesota? So I've got a really awesome nonprofit database. Say it with me, awesome nonprofit. All right. So I've got this really awesome nonprofit database, which gives me the list of all the nonprofits in every county, every city across the country. And when you look at the composition of the nonprofits here in Minnesota, religion-related is number 1. And it's number 1 in almost all states. Number 2, recreation, sports, leisure. 3, education, community improvement, arts, culture, right? This is the composition where people spend their time, they're engaged, what makes them love community. But What's your approach? I'm going to talk about this at the end, but what's your approach to newcomers? Or do you say, like, you just need to learn how we do it around here? Or do you see where they actually want to spend their time? And I would show you this, that right now, 56, there is not some old, antiquated social infrastructure that you're trying to welcome people into when they move in. Like, you're new in town, like, here's all our groups. Like, the groups keeps getting bigger, too. And in fact, 56% of all the nonprofits in Minnesota have been created in the past 30 years. We are constantly creating new nonprofits, 10 to 15% every 5 years. And it takes a ton of work to do this. You got to find people with your interest and a board and file your 501c3 paperwork. And this is a ton of work. And what type of groups are they? Recreation, sports, leisure, education, arts, human services, philanthropy. I mean, the legacy amendment is visible here. We have strong values in Minnesota around cooperative work, social development, nonprofit. We have more nonprofits than 90% of all the states in the country, per capita. 1 in 23 people in Minnesota need to serve as a nonprofit or government leader. In our rural communities, that's 1 in 9. 1 in 9 people in your community have to serve as a nonprofit or government leader. West Central Initiative has all the hard data for the region, and Becker, Clay, Douglas Grant, all those. But think about this, like, if you have a new person moving in, what's your view? You want to support what they want to do, or you just tell them, like, here's where your opportunities are in this town? What do you present to them? So really the biggest shift we've seen is this, and I'll end the social engagement stuff here, but it's really, historically, people would be involved in these place-based groups with a broad focus. So I talk about, like, I lived in Hancock for a long time, the Hancock Community Betterment Club. It didn't help Benson or Morris, right? It was Hancock. Narrow geography, but it served any of the groups in town. The firemen needed equipment, we were donating money for that. School needed a new playground, we were donating money for that, whatever. Narrow geography, broad focus. Today, people want to be involved in just the opposite on both axes. Rather than a narrow geography, it's a broad geography. Rather than a broad focus, it's a narrow focus. Mid-Minnesota Bicycle Association. They're not doing everything, they're biking. I'm in that group. We travel all around the state. You don't have a whole town engaged in it. You have like 2 people in that town and 3 people in that town, and we all meet up in Chisholm, right? Or Callaway, or wherever it is that we're biking. This is how people spend their time. So meanwhile, if you're involved in the Lions or the Eagles or a place-based group, these people never show up. But this is the work to do. How do you bridge the old and the new? The older groups have experience, legacy fundraising experience, community building experience. The new ones have a lot of passion and interest and funding and leadership interest. These new people are spending more money, they're leading more groups than the resident population. So how do you actually see these people then, right? We might not see them because we live in this huge region. So economically even, we do live in mega regions. And you're in a pretty big county here, but even so. So Dartmouth did these studies that looked at how big of a commuting pattern people have around these different regions. And we're pretty lucky, like in Minnesota here, we have lots of regional centers. So really since the 1940s, 50s, we saw the rise of all our regional centers, Fergus, Alec, Wilmer, Pipestone, all those kind of rise up. We have them. This is the shift that's happened. We have shifted jobs away from Hancock to Morris, right? To what used to be a locally owned grocery store to Walmart or to a big box retailer. These are dynamics of real change that we went through. So we are actually living in these regional centers. But every day in Otter Tail County, 10,800 people commute out of the boundary that live here to work somewhere else. Every day, 6,700 people drive into the county boundary to work. And just 16,000 people both live and work. 60%. We are highly mobile, and I will say this as loud and clear as I can. Your county boundaries were drawn during a time of horse and buggy and don't reflect how people live. But you all have to make decisions and be accountable for this jurisdiction that you're in this county, right? So what, we got to create houses here? Like, is it okay to have the house next door? What about jobs? Is it okay to have the job next door and the house here? There's a distinct relationship here where we've teased all of these things apart. No town is a one-stop shop, and if you think it's gonna be, that's not. We'll look at all of the data why you should not be so parochial as to think everything has to happen in your town. And I can say that because I'm not from here, right? We are very diverse economically. I think a lot of times when I talk to people about potentially moving to a rural community, I'd be like, hey, would you move to Hancock or would move to a rural place? And the number one answer I get is like, I'm not a farmer. Okay. Like, we have a more diverse economy literally than ever before. I am glad that we are not highly dependent upon a singular industry. And in fact, Bridget Tuck in our research office in Extension, she does these studies called economic composition reports, and she's like, you're right. Any one town, Hancock, you don't have a diverse economy. Callaway, any of these individual small towns don't. But when you put 3 to 5 counties together, you have the same diversity in your economy that you find in the metro. So now, rather than saying like, I don't know if we really have those jobs, like, not only can you say you have those jobs, but they might not be in my town, they're going to be in your town. Now I have to know that. So if somebody's looking to move into Hancock and you're like, I'm an electrical engineer, and I'm like, sorry, we got nothing for you. I should know that Benson has a whole electrical engineering firm down there that I could be referring you to, but if I'm super parochial and think everything's got to happen in my town, I'm never going to make that referral. People are telecommuting too. A full 21% of newcomer households were telecommuting in some way for a company not in your town. So we got these people moving in, and now they're taking up housing. Your housing now is under considerable competition and stress because you've got these different dynamics. People that are moving in and not taking a job here, people moving in and working remotely for a place out of Chicago. But meanwhile, raise your hand if you're an employer. What do you say then if you just watched all these people move in that do not have a local job, but your housing stocks are full? How do you support economic development anymore? Like, don't bring any more people in, right? I can't even find a home for the people that just retired. And this is the story I've got. Since the 70s, there's been a regular pattern of people moving in. The 90s filled up almost every vacant home across rural America. 2000s, it slowed, and we'll look at why it slowed a little bit, but now our homes are full. The only way to bring somebody in is to have somebody move out, die or move out. We'll talk about the death piece. You gotta talk about death, it's coming up. So really we live in the middle of everywhere. You don't live in the middle of nowhere. I do this whole exercise where you hand out a map of the region. I may have done this years ago here, but you hand out a map of the region, and you have people put a star where they live and an X where they work, right? And already we know that people don't live and work in the same town, but then draw a boundary around, think around how far you've gone in the past year to shop and eat out. And it's huge. We do these exercises. So here's one example of like McLeod County. So here's McLeod County right here. And we ask people in this leadership development program, how far do you go out to shop and eat out in the past year? Of course, nobody is like, oh, I hit the county boundary and I better turn. It's huge. Every time you pass a car on the highway, there's a whole life going on, a complexity of life that happens with all of these people and all of these interactions. You see all these cars passing by you on the highway, going to work, going to shop, to visit their family. I don't think we truly understand how complex life is. If you believe you know everyone, then it's pretty simple, but you don't. You might know of people, but you don't really know them. So Hope Williams in Wadena County, who were there maybe 3 months ago here now, she was like, man, I really want this present. So I did a presentation in Pine River at a group up there in Wadena, and she was like, I just want to blur the lines on our county. I was like, yeah, blur the lines, because that's what it's all about. Because these lines were, again, drawn during the time of horse and buggy. So let's look at a new tool. So this is piece number one of the new stuff I want to show you is we actually have, right, cell phones. Cell phones are ubiquitous. Almost everybody has one of these. There are companies out there that have all the data. If you're afraid of the private sector knowing things about you, like, there's tons of data about you on this. So right off the bat, this phone and this data set from Placer knows where the phone lives overnight, knows where its home is, it knows where its work is, it knows where you're visiting in these areas. So this on the map exercise, this in the middle of everywhere exercise I used to do on pen and paper, now we can just use your cell phone data. So we did this. For example, so this is Wadena. I just want to show off Wadena. If you're interested in pursuing this, we are trying to make this into more of a product because this is literally brand new for us, this data set. So Wadena County. This is employees by home location. So this is people that work in Wadena County, but come in to Wadena every day. Now, they have to work for a minimum of 90 days. And we did find out that there were some people down here that were travel nurses that stayed up there for 3 months or 4 months. So there's a reason why on one side you might look at the data and show we're net exporters. Like there's people moving or working outside of our county, but in data like this, it shows they're net importers of labor. So now this is the fuller exercise that we would normally do. Again, how far are Cass County now? How far do Cass County residents go out to eat? Again, nobody's stopping at the county boundaries. You're living in this region. You can see the impact of the highway, 169 through there. So how far do Cass County residents go to shop, right? And now it's huge. You get down to St. Cloud, down to the cities, Duluth, Fargo. How far do residents go to play and recreate? So you can classify a lot of these places that people go to as recruitment opportunities, meaning do you have a location here that's bringing in people from the outside all the time? Or do you have a location in town that's just serving the general public, like a YMCA? Serves a region immediately around that place. So this, you can answer like awesome questions. You can now answer questions not just about the county or the city that you're in, but you can ask like, how many people came into town for the 4th of July? How busy was it over the summer? What about the end of the year at that event that we had? So here's Cass County, excuse me. Green are the employees. These are people that come in to the county every day and just work. Red are the people that live there. And these are the number of activities. This isn't the number of people. This is the number of activities that you do. So imagine you drive into town, you leave home, you drive into town, you go get coffee somewhere, right? And then you go to work. And then at lunch, you go to grab something to eat. So these are all visits that you make in the community. I'm working on my language around this too. So if you don't understand it, let me know. So the red are the residents. So you'll notice there's some consistency here that people do the same things almost all the time. You don't pick new days to shop. Our lives aren't willy-nilly. I don't know what's going on tomorrow. Like Google Calendar runs my life. Like, not really, but, we're in a life of habits. We call habits of the heart. We live habitual lives. We may introduce new things into it, but ultimately you see the habituality of life right here. People that come in to work, there are more people coming in here. So the question that Dee Dee Lemaire had out of Brainerd was like, if you were to run into somebody, a stranger, in Cass County in February, who would you run into? In February, you're probably going to run into an employee. But in the summer, here's the visitor peak, 4th of July, closing up the cabin, all that kind of stuff. You can easily see the seasonality in this, but this is a broad picture of it. You can ask it for a specific event, for a very specific location. So you can ask all sorts of questions to get over the stereotypes or the speculation that people have. And this is kind of what we do. So this is data I've got from a seasonal homeowner study we did here in Otter County years ago. And again, just to show like how far people own property in this county. Almost every state has somebody in it that owns property in Otter County. These are, bless you, these are all visitors, right, into the county. This is where your people are coming from. Steve Johnson has a place in Otter Tail. It's coming over. So this becomes part of this whole regionality of life that we actually live in. And so North Dakota, they run with this. They created this whole contest called the Rendezvous Region, which is like all of northeastern North Dakota. They have a contest for the best restaurant, the best golf course, the best blank in the region, because they know that's how people live. People don't just show off your town. So this becomes important to see, like, how do we characterize ourselves? So when we truly live in the middle of everywhere, how do you portray yourself? What if I'm looking to move into Hancock, right? And I run into the mayor, and the mayor's like, man, you're going to love Hancock. We got Buddy's Bar and Grill. We have a full K-12 school. We have a C-store / car sales / deli / hair cutter on the corner. I was like, yeah, I do love Hancock. But I'm also looking to move into Starbucks. I'm also looking to Starbucks, right? Well, now the parochialism kicks in, and you're like, well, you don't want to go to Starbucks. They got nothing going on there. Hancock's where it's at. Now you really are living in the middle of nowhere. If you can't portray things to me in the region, if all you can talk about is your town, that's not how people live. Behaviors are different than our jurisdictions right now. We're struggling in this tension around trying to achieve outcomes around our jurisdictions when that's not how people live. You want to create homes? Are the jobs good enough? Like, is that good enough? Or are the homes next door, as I mentioned earlier? So they're, like, literally in the year 2000 and the year 2010, we thought a ton more change was coming around our housing, but it didn't. So here's Otter Tail County's housing demo in the year 2000, and here are the baby boomer bump of homeowners. So this is by age, and this is 35 to 54 in the year 2000. And then 10 years later, these people are 10 years older, right? You see that bump move over? And then 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I was like, man, that bump's gonna move over, we're gonna have all this housing open up. And then it didn't. I couldn't really figure out why. And I get called, Rick, like, hey Ben, where's all the housing? I'm glad you called me to the table on that. And I found out. So, historically, in the past, once people hit the age of 67, so this is home ownership rate by age. As people age at the age of 67, up to 30% would move out of their home. Up to 30% of the population starts to move out of their home at the age of 67. What happens when they move out, and what type of home are they in? They're in the workforce housing. What happens when they move out? It provides room for people to move in. And what type of move over do they look for? It's smaller, patio home, condo, less maintenance. So now, getting back to that whole rural narrative thing about this started in the 70s and filled up in the 90s, and then 2000, 2010 it slowed, and we didn't know why. It's because in the year 2000, when these folks on the previous chart started to retire, they looked to move over, and they found out that all the move over housing was already full. In the past 10 years now, there's no move over housing for these folks, so they stay in our workforce housing. And my common line right now is you don't have any shortage of workforce housing even. You got plenty of housing that's occupied by the wrong people. Not everybody. I am the person who's trying to kick our seniors out of their homes. Not really. And not really. Those over the age of 55. So this is the real housing. I'm almost 50. I just turned 55. I should say almost. I just turned 55. So, I will say, this is deeply personal for me now. The whole second half of this presentation is going to be pretty personal because I'm a big believer in home ownership. You have to set some values here. I believe home ownership is important. When you have your own home, you maintain your own home at higher levels. You can pick up a lot of skills to do this. So meanwhile, again, we have all these people who are homeowners. Let me get back to this. We'll get onto that in a second. In previous generations, up to 30% would move out, but now this generation today are staying in their homes. So what's the difference between this line and this line? These are all the people who would have moved in over the past 15 years if there would have been move over housing for them. But right now they're not. So again, 58% of older adults haven't changed residence more than 20 years. So in fact, we see the artifact of this in Otter Tail County where 54% of homeowners were like over the age of 55 in the year 2010, but now that's up to almost 60%. When you have an inability and just grow our older population, you do bring in younger people, and that percentage maintains consistency here. But what you lose are the middle-aged homeowners because these people got older. These people got older, moved into that category, and some of these people here died, right, and allowed room for the younger people to move in. It is a churn of housing. It's not just, we need 7,454 workforce homes. It's not as simple as that. This is the baby boom generation right now that's working its way through its housing preferences. And then there's the Gen X's like me that nobody cares about. But then after me are the millennials who are even bigger. So when you are building housing, you're not doing for a one-off thing for this older population. Then what are we going to do with all the housing? Like, it's going to be needed. If you have a narrative of Japan population decline, leave it. We're not there. We're not even close. Our population will continue to grow. And the only reason you've grown is because you build housing, because you're working against demographic destiny. The fact that we have, on average, fewer people per household. You are one of the only counties that's done this. then you're low-hanging fruit for me. Like, you guys have done all this work. And thank you for that. Because there are so few places that believe housing is something they should get into, because it's seen as a private asset and not a public good. So I do talk about our age in place stuff. Like, why are our seniors our older people? I shouldn't say, okay, I've learned you can't say seniors, because right away when I talk about building senior housing, people are like talking about assisted living. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about continuum of life housing before you get to the continuum of care. And this is condos, apartments, those kinds of things, patio homes. This is where people are moving over to. But right now, we have a whole age in place strategy. When we ask seniors, like, why don't you move? We know why. There's stress of moving, fear of losing independence, comfort with your home, right? All of these reasons we know why people currently don't move. And in fact, we have built up an entire industry around age in place to, like, bring your mom meals and take her to doctor's appointments in her workforce home, in her 4-bedroom, 2-bath place that she never goes upstairs in anymore, is now the home that we're dealing with. So right now I would argue that our age in place is very confusing. And it doesn't mean age in place, it should mean age in community. Every time we have done a survey with older adults, they consistently say, I would much rather be in town than to be out of town in another town, because right now I argue our seniors have a policy, our people over the age of 55 have a policy of best intentions. And that is, I'm going to live in my house forever. That's not a policy all decision makers can build any planning on, right? So meanwhile, what happens? We have older people right now who are spending a lot of money to stay in that home. We're going to put on a ramp. We're going to update the bathroom. And my mom just spent 15 grand doing all this work, right? And she's in it for a year, and she's got to move out. And now the real estate agent is like, man, I would love to sell your mom's house, but there's knob and tube wiring in that thing. And you can't get insurance on that. And there's peeling paint, by the way, and you can't get a first-time home buyer eligibility if you've got a lick of peeling paint on that. So tell your mom to do those 2 things, then we'll get your house sold. And my mom's like, what? I just spent 15 grand putting on the ramp and updating the bathroom. That was a pure livability expense. That was not an equity builder in the home. We are not having real conversations about our real intentions as we move forward. And I talk about this pretty readily. I live in a 4-level split. And I had back surgery 24 years ago. I know your mind cannot drag your body around. The moment I am unable to get up and down stairs, I'm gone from this place. I know what life was like. Right now, again, you have folks who are like, I'm just going to live here forever. And all these policies. And then, meanwhile, I'm like, hey, Mom, it doesn't look like you're getting around very good. Then my mom's like, shut up, I'm getting around just fine. And then she goes to the doctor in the afternoon and is like, oh, my hip, I can barely get up and down the steps. Like, why didn't you tell your son that in the morning? So, how do you have a conversation about the actual intentions? This is people work. This is a ton of people work to talk about what you want, where you want to go. So right now, when you have a policy of best intentions and you have to move, everything is exacerbated. Remember all those reasons, stress, fear, anxiety, the reasons why older people don't even consider moving right now, those are totally exacerbated when they have to move in 2 weeks. Do this thought exercise. Pretend like you own the home next to you, and your mom lives there, and you have to move her out in 2 weeks. Where does she end up? 2 towns over, county over, who knows, like away from her friends, in my house, right? How is that really going to look? We can reduce a lot of pain right now if we engage these conversations with our older populations about trying to negotiate our future and our identity and who we believe we are, because ourselves are being sacrificed through some of this work. So, Kelly Ash with the Center for Rural Policy and Development says, the longer these people are in the homes, the more chance there's going to be dilapidated properties, right? Now, what's the cost of private inaction? I lived in Hancock, where my house and my neighbor's house, Howard, who was in the railroad, he was on a fixed income. I put in new windows, ripped out all the lack of insulation and stuff, and insulated the house, put in new windows, but Howard was on a fixed income, he couldn't do anything. Our homes were in terribly different shape. And when Howard passed away, if it weren't for his daughter moving right into that place, it could have never been sold. It would have been razed to the ground. So now, should I be concerned as Howard's neighbor? Not only do I have a property valuation that's probably going to go down when I have a dilapidated property next to me, but what's going to have the impact here of a dilapidated property? So say in year number 1, or last year, we had 4 houses in town. I know it's not real. But those 4 houses each brought in $1,000. But now Howard's house got torn down this year, and so now you're only assessed on the land, right? Because your assessment is usually on the land and the property, but if you take the property off, you are only going to be levied the amount on the land. Howard's property tax bill went from $1,000 to $200 a year. County commissioners here? Do you lower your levy when you have a house that lost their their property tax valuation? Certainly not. I mean, who's going to pay for the reduction in the property valuation right here? Everybody else's property taxes go up because of one household unable to keep their place up. There's a public cost now to private inaction. What happens when you don't have a house? This became a very basic question for us, and this is some of the newer research we've got. So we do talk about patio homes, all these things. You guys have already done that. So now you need to make the argument here. I'm going to do a quick time check. We're going to 9:45. Is that right? Yes. Okay. You need to make the argument. Why should economic development care about older people? Right? They're not even in the workforce. Retirement dollars are like a delayed paycheck. Right? You're still getting those dollars, but it's years later, and you're spending all those dollars in your town. You're not putting away money for retirement. Those are your retirement dollars. You're spending it all. On Main Street, downtown, in your region, on your home, spending it all. Why should you care about this population that doesn't have a job anymore? Because the job isn't all the income in your county. When you think of all the income that comes into your county every day, jobs only make up 53%, just over half of all the income being generated in your county comes from a job. Another, 19% are dividends, interest, and rent. Right up here. So rental properties, right? If you own rental property, you're garnering income from that. You have dividends or interest, that makes up 20%. 27% of your income comes in the form of a transfer receipt. That's old age Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We're talking about those cuts right now. When you look at the historical data here over time, the maroon bar, the one that's not dotted, is our transfer receipt. And this is old age Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. This doesn't include 401ks. This doesn't include any private retirement accounts. This is only public transfers. And from Social Security, you get that money as a retiree. But Medicare and Medicaid is a pass-through. It goes through you to the clinic, to the hospital, to the pharmacy, right? If you're in healthcare, you know exactly how many jobs generally you have today because of all these non-job income sources in your county. So part of our argument here is if you don't have anywhere for people to move over to, they're going to move out. And they're going to take these transfer receipts with them. Then what's going to be the impact of that, right? You ready to lose $1 in $4 because you don't have anywhere for people to move over to? It's not going to be that high. But you see a pandemic-related bump there with the income adjustment stuff. But really, it's been a line that's going up, and that number will be well over 40% in the next 10 years. Because this doesn't include private retirement accounts, even. Once you start adding them in, and the older baby boomer, or the younger baby boomers tend to have 401ks, the older ones tend not to, so it's the younger boomers are gonna have some of this stuff. So, now this is the second new piece of information I've got. So part of this is, what's the economic impact of just having a house? Part of this is a basic question I had, what's the impact of, first I think I started with, what's the impact of not having a house in town? Right, then you've got nowhere for people to have a job, or take on leadership positions, or raise their family. But there's a pure economic question around this too, around the construction of a home, around what does that home produce. So we've done this in Rice and the surrounding counties and looked at this model. This is a snippet of it, but this is, we use something called economic impact modeling. So you look at direct, indirect, and induced effects of a certain product. So it might be a person with a job. They directly create all these sales They indirectly create sales for the businesses that they go to, and they induce effects by creating all these other jobs that people have in town because they're in town. There's all these kind of buffers that go on in a ring around that individual housing unit. And what we find, the more important one here is we looked at the economic impact of the construction of these homes, which those numbers are low, they're like from 5 years ago. But more importantly, what's the economic impact of the habitation? Of having a home and someone living in that home, or a household living in that home that's garnering income and spending money in the community. And now we find, what did I do with that one? Oh yeah, I know you can't read this, but we'll share the PowerPoint here. In addition to the income that every household produces through the job that they have, every household produces $51,000 in economic output annually. Just having that house there and having a household in there spends that kind of money. So now I almost get to the point like, you guys are housing developers. This is a wise investment. This is a pittance. How long does it take you to get back a $100,000 investment? A couple to 3 years in the community. So now, is a house a public good and a private asset at the same time? I argue it is. I have a big belief that without that security, it's like Maslow's low order need. You have to have somewhere to live. You have to feel safe, secure. If you don't have that, you've got nothing else after this. We can build everything around that lower order Maslow. So let's look at what this really would look like around this economic impact of having a home. We're going to do this study in more depth. I just want to introduce the idea to you that there is certainly an economic return on building a home. So like, what if you were to invest $100,000 in a home? You get that back. But how do you portray this to the public? Like, I'm not going to give your mom any money for her house. Why would I do that? It's a public good. At the same time, how do you meet the friction around this? So I will say housing, new family housing is rarely an option in our smallest towns. You guys have developers here, which is different, and are a developer, which instigates a lot of stuff. But most of the communities I work in just don't have a magic formula to build homes. So I'm going to caveat here and talk about the maintenance of our existing structures. And that is part of your big bill too, is maintenance, because when you look at the composition of this older housing stock, what kind of shape are these homes in when the older people finally move out of them? And it's not good, right? You're right now deferred maintenance. You have deferred maintenance on the person, much less the house, right? Every year the heating bills are going up and you're heating the outside of the house through your single pane windows and putting less food into your body, less medicine, less infrastructure, much less into the house. So again, getting back to the point of what kind of shape our home's in. So our existing housing stock is a primary asset, but nobody is responsible for all the housing in your community. So imagine you were going to go and visit with all the people over the age of 55 and talk about their intentions. This is what I advocate for. Talk to people about their intentions of that home. I will advocate for a free pre-sale inspection for older people so they're not surprised when they go to sell their home. It could be no risk. And it's really important because a lot of people don't want their home to be seen, like they may be uncomfortable with certain aspects of their interior, right? So you need to find a way to do this to let people know that we've got an opportunity for them to look at the type of home that they've got. So this for me is an important piece. Number one, free pre-sale inspections. My dad passed away when I was 19. So I was a cocky little kid and was like, I'm not spending time with my dad, right? But he was like a car mechanic and a woodworker. He had a 12-car garage, half woodworking, half mechanic stuff. And I was just, now I'm like, man, I'm such an idiot as a kid. Like all this knowledge I could have gained from him, but I didn't. So I went to college in Morris and I was working at Amoco and I got to learn how to, now I was like fixing cars at Amoco, like, oh, I could learn that, but I didn't. So I had somebody else, his name was Lane Sin, who was a guy that lived in Alberta. I worked in Amoco, and I called him my hand holder. Anytime I had a problem, I could call him. He would be there to help me. I'm replacing the motor in my Mustang. As long as I knew he was there, I was willing to do anything. Same with my house. I lived in this house that was built in 1907. It was in rough shape, had knob and tube wiring everywhere. 14-degree differential between the main floor and the top floor because there's no insulation upstairs. I rip out the walls and take out one bag of insulation. Like, this is the kind of home you've got. I am also a big believer in self-help and that we can actually do a lot of this stuff in our homes ourselves. And because we have this shortage of tradespeople, we need to build our own capacity. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with Reddit. Some people are kind of afraid of it. But I started a home improvement sub on Reddit 10 years ago, went from 500 people, now there's 4.5 million people on the board. And why is that? It's because no question is too stupid. Where's my water shut off? Like, where is that? How do you change an outlet out? Like, turn off the outlet, put on the tamper resistant. Like, it's not hard, right? You don't need an electrician to do a lot of the things to improve our homes. You need a hand holder. So I do talk about, like, I love the Habitat for Humanity model for new builds, but that doesn't help me fix up my house in Hancock, which has no 90-degree angles. No level floor, right? So it's one thing to go for Habitat and like, oh, I'll put on like LVP, that's great. And I get to my place, it's like, oh, I need self-leveling concrete, I guess, for this. Like, there's a lot of work to be done around improving our homes, and I believe we can do it ourselves. You build the talent pipeline, you let your high school kids know right now, you be banking it in the trades after 2 years. But have an out, because it wears on your body heavily in the trades. So I will talk about offering courses, Habitat for Rehab. Not Habitat for new build, but Habitat for Rehab. How about a community toolbox? How about a rental for all the ramps that get put onto people's homes? How about have a ramp kit that would be available for your community rather than every household paying $6,000 to $8,000 to have these ramps built? Have them be a community asset. What about a community toolbox? I can rent saws. I can rent sawzalls. I can learn how to do things. I am all about this field right now because you have tons of homes that need work. And right now, who's paying for the improvements on our homes? Sorry, I'm probably hitting time here pretty quick. Oh, 3 minutes, okay. What was I gonna say? Who's fixing up our homes? So meanwhile, a lot of times our policy best intentions, like my mom may be eligible for a home weatherization program, but she's too proud to do it. She doesn't take it on. But meanwhile, now when she goes to sell her house, the new person moving in has to pay for all these things. You need a roof and insulation and windows. Like, you had a home weatherization program offered in the county here. I know you do. Is it taken 100%? Not always in all the different counties. So now, if my mom, for example, were in that property, she may be eligible for home weatherization and to improve the content of the infrastructure of that house. But if my mom doesn't and she waits for the new person to move in, the new person's generally not eligible, income eligible. Now you're paying another $70,000 on top of your purchase price because nobody cared about all the housing. Nobody cared that your mom's place was going to pot and whatever. The laissez-faire approach is going to bite us pretty soon as these homes start to turn over, and what kind of shape are they in? So these are the avenues I'd like to look at: our existing housing stock, having conversations with people in them. Like community development, nobody wants to pay for community development. I mean, you guys do. But like generally, community development's really hard to pay for because it's people work, right? It's actually talking to people about their intentions, what they would like to do in that house. So we are seeing a bunch of change. The graying of rural from 20 years ago is now the dying of rural. There is so much death before us right now, but that death is joy and healing because it's out with the old, in with the new, just like it was before. It's always been like this. We're always renewing, always reviving ourselves. Our towns aren't just going away. Do you allow the new people in the community to own your town? To say that this is yours? Do you even feel like the town that you're in is yours? Like sometimes you'd move in and you're there for 10 years. Like, kinda, not really. So there's a transfer of wealth coming to, massive transfer. We do these studies here at the University Extension now that look at how much wealth is going to pass from one generation to the next. But more importantly, in our rural communities, we have a large proportion of older people whose kids don't live here anymore. So now the wealth that they've generated here passes out of the community. So we do advocate for community foundations, Initiative Foundation doing work in this realm of trying to ensure and build capital campaigns around community vitality and narrative. So, Community housing succession. Like honestly, maybe one of the best things you can do for your community is just ensure there's somewhere for them people to live. Like you don't need to organize social life. You don't need to always help people find a job. People will do that. You just need to help people find a place to live. So I'm going to end on this one point, which is that culture piece I talked about earlier. Do you believe your community is a melting pot or is it a stew? Like we do talk about the melting pot thing a lot, and I'll tell you, I don't like it at all. The melting pot implies that you have something here and that everybody coming in just needs to learn how you do it around here. An alternative in the literature to the melting pot is the salad. But that I don't like because it's like the pieces are independent. They're not really touching each other. Like they're touching, but not really. I still like the whole idea of a pot, like a melting pot, but more like we're a stew. And we are constantly ladling people out and ladling people in. And the broth is the culture in our community. It has remnants of where we've been, but it's not the same as it was. But this dictates everything about how you see newcomers. Do you let them express their version of what your community is? Because there are some arguments out there that there is very little culture in our communities aside from that that's been generated in the past 20, 30 years. And it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. This isn't Europe culture here. This is the United States. So this is my end point of the conversation. And this is really where we go. How do you ensure that you can have a public conversation about a private asset? You need to have the arguments for it. So thank you all for all the work that you've been doing. I really, this is our first year doing the return on investment on housing. We're trying to learn more. Nate is on the group too. We just have a small subset. So I'd be happy to hear feedback. Everything you hear today is a result of you in the past saying, I want to know more about this. Tell me what you want to know more about, and that's what I do my research on. Okay, so please share your feedback. If you're doing an eval, are you doing an eval? An evaluation? I don't even know. Well, anyway, my email is right there, benw@umn.edu. Feel free to email me if you've got recommendations or questions or the return on investment on housing. We're going to have a piece kind of more published out of that here this summer. But it is for us the way forward, trying to argue that housing is a public good. Thanks, everybody.
All right, thank you, Ben. We do have time for questions, so we wanted to make sure that while this is fresh, what's jumping out of your minds that you want to ask Ben or bring up from your community's perspective? Questions? Oh, come on, there. You.
I can talk. So my question is, you talked about 21% telecommunicating.
Telecommuting. Yep.
That's what I meant to say.
Yep.
A lot of that, or I believe that some of that was attributed because of the pandemic.
That was before the pandemic.
That was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that there was an uptick during
Yes.
the pandemic. I know that a lot of places are requiring people to go back to the office. How much of that telecommuting population is driven by that? You know, I mean, how much are we going to lose of the community?
How much will you, for a return to office kind of thing
Yeah.
if people, well, okay, like number one, there's a huge tension over your housing. So like local employers should be like, yeah, let's get those telecommuters out of there because I need homes. I mean, this is the real thing. You have a competition over housing. Your county shouldn't have some like remote work contest. We're going to pay $15,000 to be able to pay somebody to come in here. Why would you as an employer want that? Like, you're competing over this limited housing that we've got. We don't know the numbers. Generally, the people in this category tend to be higher income and tend to be, when you're in your 30s, 40s, you tend to have a little more earning power and stability in your job too. Not like an 18 to 25-year-old being called back to the office.
Yeah.
So we did studies around that, just look at the types of jobs that were being called back aren't the ones that tended to have the higher income and the occupational security that led them to move to rural in the first place. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Yeah. Sorry, I don't really have a good answer.
Well, and I would just add anecdotally, we know of folks who moved here in 2021 who were working remote and have since transitioned to a local employer. So we know, that has happened over several years. So that's also an opportunity to tap into that labor force.
That would be super interesting to look at.
Yeah.
Just how many have made that kind of turnkey transition over to be a local employee.
Yeah. You can figure that out.
Yep.
That's your job. Other questions for Ben? Yeah, Lynn.
I remember a couple of years ago at this housing summit, a developer talking about building lake homes versus building more affordable housing, and speaking very candidly about the margins.
Oh, yeah.
The margin on a lake home is much better. How do we reconcile that? And what opportunities do you see for developers in incentivizing that lower end housing?
I don't know. Housing doesn't get magically built where you wave the flag, right? It gets built where the high margins are right now. They're hardly even out here. If you have a developer out here, it's going to be a community developer more so. But it comes to, like, if you ever, this fits into the transfer of wealth. So you remember that map with all the second homeowners that live somewhere else? All of the properties that are owned up here, from a community point of view, they're not your wealth anymore. If I own property, I live in Stearns County, if I own property in your county right here, and the property valuation goes up, can you all appreciate that? No, I appreciate the valuation in that property increase. The only thing you all appreciate are the property taxes, but meanwhile, that's not your wealth, that's now extra local wealth. Everything generated on that property is not yours. So you see things like land trusts being created to ensure that the people living here, or the people buying that land, actually live here. You can set some assurances. You have to set your values and say, we do not want to advocate for the building of the higher margin areas with our public monies. For example, we're not going to spend any dedicated planning time on that side. The market's already serving that segment, I would argue. The wheelhouse is everything else not being served. This is the public good for me. That still has massive potential economic outputs, and even more so than that one property that a second homeowner may own. A single middle-of-the-road income is going to have a much larger impact on your community than a single extra locally owned cabin. Second homes are not yours. They are owned by the people where they live, and they are counted as the wealth where they live. So there are opportunities to recapture local wealth. I mean, you guys, similar, Aiken County too, 54% of the homes there are second properties, second owner. Like, we don't have a shortage of housing. You're inhibited by the money. How many bedrooms sit empty in the county every day? Because we don't have the ability to get into them financially. So there's no shortage of housing. There's shortage of housing for some people, for some incomes. So that's where you have to set your value. You have to set your values around that.
Okay, other questions? Yeah.
The other things that we're gonna have to deal with going forward is
Insurance. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, this is a whole new thing right now, just in the past years, in terms of the exacerbation of all these insurance home values too. So Minnesota has been called like a climate haven in some ways, but some ways it's not. Like, we're still getting smoke and all these other pieces of kind of environmental problems in our community. So I don't know the extent to which insurance is going to play into this. Right now, everything is a big question mark. Everything is a big question mark for the past 6 months in terms of like the Medicare, Medicaid cuts, the interest rates going down. So there's so many values, so many kind of markers going against even home building, home ownership right now, between interest rates too. You've got people sitting in their homes right now that can't afford to rebuy the homes they're in, much less pay the property taxes that they went up to over the years, which is where California has been. So it's in the mix for me, along with interest rates and all these other headwinds against home ownership, that we could try to differentiate or alleviate those costs. So if that goes up, where else can you help people save? But to be honest, like, I'm not even a housing person, folks. I'm not. I'm just the data person. That's like the data tells me is I own a home, and I fixed up my home, but that's the extent of it. So.
Right. I mean, we really value the data you produce and share because we do work to provide data-informed solutions. I mean, we aren't just making this up. And later on today, I'll talk about where we are focusing our efforts and our resources, and it's in those housing products for seniors, affordability, entry-level home ownership. And so we are taking those cues based on, the private market in that move up or, executive is kind of the definition, type home, which is our homes, is happening and has happened. And so we don't need to put our effort towards that. And so we are putting our limited resources and capacity towards those areas that the private market isn't able to take on from a financial return or even just investment perspective. Yeah, Commissioner.
One thing I hear from a lot of people is older seniors can't find people to help renovate their homes, or there's nobody doing that work anymore. What can we do to?
Yeah, you talked about we don't have a lot of people just even improve our homes like handyman or anything. That's kind of gets back to my whole just develop some courses, have Home Depot courses, how to replace
outlets and how to take sheetrock or knob and tube wiring or lath and plaster, what it even is. I don't know. I think a lot of times we just don't even know because we don't want to start. But when you're in a home, you're afraid for your house. You don't want it to burn down. You don't want it to fall apart. Or I got flooded out of the Red River flood in '97, and I lost half my stuff. I know what it's like to not have a house for that period of time and not in good shape. So for me, it's just about building that knowledge network locally. To that, can you incentivize community education classes through your school? Do you have classes already through your school that might be able to do this? It's a huge opportunity for me. I mean, I have my kids muddy and tape, 10-year-old mud and taping in the garage. He can do the garage, not my main thing. But it starts slow. It's a small community education campaign I would like to see. And that involves, again, I'd mentioned on that slide, a community toolbox. Some people don't have the tools. What do you even need for some of those things? So for me, it is all about almost there's that SCORE group, the retired executive group. It's almost I want all these retired electricians and plumbers to come and consult on this little community building thing we want to do about training people how to fix up their home. So I don't know. I love this idea. I really don't see anybody doing it. I'm a big advocate for just helping people. I want to be your hand holder, to say you can do that. It's not that hard to do some things until you run into the uncertain stuff. But at that point, I just do. I go through the high schools. If you've got a high school, if you go through community education, and just if you've got any home improvement stores, your lumber yards, stuff like that, who will benefit from increased home rehab. They would benefit from that too. So those are the primary audiences I go through, the younger audiences, plus all the new people moving in that need to do work to their house and let them know that they might have something available to them. Other questions? Thank you.
Great. All right, we'll take about a 15 minute break and come back for some more discussion about housing. And I realized I maybe didn't introduce myself at the front end of this, but I am Amy Baldwin with Otter County. Been in my role here since 2019 and serve as the executive director for our community development agency and now as well our housing and redevelopment authority. And Tanya Westra is here as well. You want to? Or I can introduce you. Tanya is our housing program supervisor with Otter County, and supports a lot of the programs that we administer locally and available throughout the county now. All right, so we are going to get started. And I did want to mention one thing out of Ben's, there's so many things I could mention, but one particular piece. Ben mentioned the use of Placer AI to understand people movement patterns, and some of you may know we at Otter County have recently subscribed to that service as well. And so we are using that to also have data to inform our decisions. It's in partnership with Otter Lakes Country and looking at our tourism patterns, our visitor patterns, our workforce patterns, and really, really interesting stuff. We're just digging into it and learning, but good to know we can maybe think about that data and how we talk about it together. So, all right. We are going to start this session in a little bit of learning, maybe review for folks who are here, but want to talk, give some high-level overview information, kind of not deep, but dabble the surface of various housing finance tools. What's out there? How are they leveraged? When do they come in? Because when we do our project reviews, after that, we'll be referencing those tools. So we wanted to give kind of that baseline information about what are some of the programs and tools that were used so that folks kind of have that understanding before we talk about them within a specific project. So these are incredibly useful tools. We'll talk about timing later when we do the program or project overviews and kind of the deeper dives into those projects to understand the timing components of either accessing these dollars or utilizing these dollars. And why, I mentioned that they are extremely important. And one of those, why we realize they are very important is as we were pulling together data for this event and looking back at projects that have been built over the last 5 or so years, we could not find a multifamily project or a new subdivision within a community that had public infrastructure needs that did not use one of these tools. So just to reemphasize the importance of our communities to understand, for our developers to understand, and we will have a couple of developers joining us as we walk through the projects later to see how they leverage them and why it mattered to them to help those projects move forward. All right, so hopefully everyone got enough coffee as I talk about tax increment financing. And so referred to as TIF, been around in Minnesota since the 1970s, written into state statute at that time. How it's used is defined by state statute as far as requirements, process, and eligibility, things like that are all defined on a statewide basis. And the basic is that as you build a project, and we'll talk about the different types of projects that it can be used for, but the new taxes that are generated by that project can be used to help support those upfront expenses or other obligations for the project to help it move forward. So it's a financing mechanism to help bring either private investment or to offset public investment into projects. So we'll be talking mostly about housing, but we can also use for other things too. Typically, and we always recommend that if a community is using tax increment financing, that you work with the developer to really understand the project costs. What are the inputs? What's the estimated future taxes? We can help with those estimations through our assessor's office. And really do that financial review and analysis to understand what is the amount of assistance that's needed to accomplish the project. Developers deserve and need to have a certain return on investment, but what is that appropriate return on investment based on, again, the estimations for the project, the best understanding of what that project might have. So that's just kind of what it is from a high level. There are a number of types of districts, so they are a geographically defined area. within a community. One is redevelopment, and we'll talk about how redevelopment has supported a couple of projects within the county, and using that tool in different ways in both of those projects. So there's redevelopment tax increment financing districts. They allow for up to 26 years of that new taxes to be collected. I've actually found some data at the state auditor's office, who does the reporting and tracking and monitoring of TIF districts. And in all of these districts, very seldom are they used for that full length of time that they can be in place. Because what it is doing is capturing, right, the taxes from not just the city, but the county, the school district. All of those jurisdictions are being captured and aren't realizing those new taxes until the end of when an obligation is paid off to either a developer or to whoever was making those upfront investments. So often they can go to 26 years, but they don't. So, and then once that district is done from that whatever agreed upon time frame, then all those taxing jurisdictions realize that new tax base and individual allocations of taxes. The second type of commonly used district is affordable housing or housing districts. And those can be also up to 26 years in length of time. Again, often not used for that maximum, really looking at what is needed for the project. Though in today's environment, it's becoming harder and harder with construction costs and different pieces that come into play. But the goal is to create new rental or owner-occupied housing. And there are income requirements for either the rental residents or buyers if it's an owner-occupied project. I have those stats, so if there's questions later about what is that income requirement, but we'll talk a little bit about those again in the projects that we'll be highlighting. And then the final area that is most often used with manufacturing type projects is called an economic development district. And again, often with manufacturing, that's leveraged to get that new investment, help with infrastructure expansion or things like that for manufacturing, but it does have a provision for workforce housing. This is a shorter term, up to 9 years, that those taxes can be collected and used for eligible expenses, but there is a housing provision if there's, and there is not income requirements for use here, but it is only the 9 years, and the community has to demonstrate, document low vacancy rate and employer support and a few other different components. So that's really high level. At prior housing summits, we have had our financial advisor do a whole session. So that's the 3-minute version of tax increment financing. And we work with a professional advisor. All of our cities have professional consultants to help navigate these processes, because you do have to meet those state requirements, have annual reporting, things like that. So often, especially if you don't have many, if you're a smaller community, not like Perham, there's Perham, they have a lot of tax increment financing districts, but they also use an advisor. It's not something you're going to be doing every day, so having that professional support is important. All right, so tax abatement. So different tool, also used for housing, but tax abatement is the ability to capture and use property taxes within, again, a defined geographic area for a defined period of time, so a certain number of years. Typically it's used with housing and commercial development that might not be eligible for that economic development tax increment district that I just mentioned. And market rate rental housing is where we've seen it used the most in Otter County when it relates to housing. This is also the tool that we've used for the property tax rebate program that we had up for 5 years. That was via this also state statute defined tool that has a process and requirement for how it can be put in place. Administratively, it is simpler to do it. It is by resolution, public hearing and resolution of a local entity. to define that amount and length of time that a parcel or parcels would be eligible for receiving a refund of taxes after they're paid. The difference, I mentioned in TIF, it's automatically city, county, school district that are included in that. A difference with abatement is that it requires individual authorization from those three jurisdictions or government entities. And depending on who is participating, if it is all three, you can see there's different years that you can leverage that future taxes to again pay for various components of a project. Yeah, and so it does again require each of those governing bodies to approve that resolution. So if it was requested of the school district, they don't always participate, a little different structure there, but we certainly have had school districts support housing because they realize that, as we heard from Ben, we know who's moving in, what was it, half of them have kids? Something like that, who are gonna benefit the school district and bring in more families there. So they understand that value of participating. All right, that's my very brief on abatement as well. So now I'll turn over to Tanya to talk about Minnesota Housing, and just referencing Jennifer Bergman is here from Minnesota Housing, and they have a whole slew of information.
There we go. Okay. As Amy had said or alluded to earlier, Jennifer Bergman and her team from Minnesota Housing have been extremely busy for the last, I think you said, year and a half, rolling out new programs and solidifying some of the other ones that they had. So I'm just going to touch on a few of them that are pertinent to today's discussion, but programs such as the Workforce Housing Development Program, the Community Homeownership Impact Fund, and the Greater Minnesota Small Housing Aid Grants. One of the new programs offered this year is the Greater Minnesota Housing Infrastructure Grant. For those of you that are neck deep in writing that grant application right now, just a reminder, it is due on June 12th. So you have a few weeks, just keep working on it.
I gave someone the wrong date earlier, so.
Oh, I think it's
is it June 12th? June 12th.
at noon.
Okay.
At noon, yes. But for additional information or more detailed information on Minnesota Housing's programs, you can find the guides on their website, and they are extremely useful tools. I should note, for those that are considering an application to the Community Homeownership Impact Fund, that grant application is open right now and due July 10th, I think is what I remember from my calendar. But
Thanks, Tanya. And we try to leverage these, and we'll talk a little bit. I mean, the technical assistance that we can provide to help identify what tool might be a fit for a project that a community is working to advance or that a developer is working to advance is one of those pieces that we can help with. We might not be directly involved in the actual dollars of the project, but we can certainly help with that identification of programs. Is it a fit? Key components of the program to make sure that again, the project is a fit and works for what the community is hoping to accomplish. So shifting now from kind of either state authorized programs like TIF or Minnesota Housing Direct Financing to what do we do locally at Ottertail County with our resources. And we have a Community Growth Partnership Grant Program, which is for our cities to apply for. Townships can too. We haven't had any township applications yet, but our cities can apply for funding that can be used to support affordable housing, and we try to follow those income requirements that tax increment financing uses, so they can really be paired together. Redevelopment, so whether that's property acquisition, demolition, investigation, planning work, that like assessments for understanding is there asbestos in a property, things like that from a redevelopment perspective. We do commercial rehabilitation funding where the community can match dollars and help with facade improvements and exterior, other exterior improvements, again, predominantly for communities to administer and have those investments back into the community. We have a special pool of funding right now for matching public infrastructure investments for housing. So Tanya mentioned the state program for housing infrastructure. Knowing infrastructure is a huge barrier to housing growth if communities don't have that built infrastructure. And what we developed that program locally in response to the state's program because it requires a non-state match. So having the local funds to try to match those state dollars to bring them into our community and county. And then other pre-development planning work or housing studies. We'll hear later in the day from a couple of communities who have leveraged that to complete housing studies to help them understand further what are their opportunities, where are their needs specifically within their county. Since it was launched, and this was kind of our first program when the CDA was formed in 2019, we have through this program awarded $610,000 back to our communities to leverage those local opportunities that fit within the criteria of the program. Back to Tanya.
All right, as I think was said before, we do have some financial resources that we deploy for existing housing stock as well as the creation of new units in the county. Oh, sure, sorry, we'll just move it closer. So just as we're kind of highlighting some of these, keep in mind that there are income or rent restrictions for each of them. But we do offer a new family or multifamily new construction loan that offers developers or builders a 0% interest loan to be used as gap financing for the construction of the rental units. Also on the rental side, we have a rehabilitation loan that enables property owners to renovate their existing units with a 2% interest loan that is repaid over a term of 10 years. And then on the home ownership or ownership side, I guess, the down payment assistance program supports home buyers with the purchase of an existing or new construction home in the form of a deferred loan of up to $15,000 for homeowners wanting to fix up their current home. The residential owner-occupied loan could be a good fit, but up to $30,000 is available in the form of a deferred loan. Those deferred loans do have to be paid back at some point, usually at the sale, conveyance, or in some cases, refinance of the initial mortgage. Also, for homeowners that have an urgent need, we do offer the emergency home repair program, and that is a forgivable loan that will help finance failing or near failing systems. So think of leaking roofs, a furnace that isn't functioning anymore, a septic system that quit on you. So, but if you would like additional information on any of those programs, we are all available at the resource table at the back of the room to help answer those.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. And the information that was on these last two slides is in a handout, kind of another document that also talks about the Community Growth Partnership grant program that cities can access. That's at the resource table in the back. So if you're interested in that, take a look. And all this information is on our website as well at ottertailcounty.gov/housing. So you can check that out. And we will be sending out the slide decks to those who are on our distribution list. All right, so kind of to sum up how we support projects, I mentioned already the technical assistance and helping facilitate conversations, but you know, back in 2019, we didn't have these programs that, like Tanya just talked about, funded. We didn't have the resources for it. If you recall, yeah, that if those who were here in 2019, I know there's a group of you, we were convening people around the topic. That was about all we could do because we didn't have programmatic resources. The state hadn't launched its local government programs that have been really invaluable, and I'll just put a little legislative plug in. Those programs are really valuable for projects within our communities. So if you have any desire to talk to our legislators who represent our areas, please do. And then again, connecting people to resources, knowing what are the programs that are out there, and highlighting them for information. And then now we are offering those financial resources. We launched those a couple of years ago, resulting from some funding that we were able to pull together. And then our newest role is in that direct development. And a few years ago, we started dabbling in what could that mean. And I think, as I mentioned a little earlier, we're trying to fill that niche where there isn't a private developer, where a project doesn't make sense for a private developer for the return that they may look for in a project, or you know, various reasons. Maybe there just isn't that capacity within a community, but the project makes sense in the community. So how do we bridge that gap and play a different role than what we have initially when we started this housing investment coordinated effort? So I think before we bring our developers up, maybe take questions on what Tanya and I just talked about from a programmatic standpoint, and then we'll get into some project examples where we'll walk through how those resources were leveraged into projects that are under construction now. Questions? Oh, okay. Otter tail, got a couple.
On the affordable tip, does the income requirements change after it's been established? Does the income change
Sure.
year to year?
Yeah, so the question was around affordable housing on ownership. Is that kind of looking at ownership? So the requirements for income for ownership under affordable housing TIF, and yes, they do get adjusted annually. Those numbers just came out or coming out. So it wasn't much of an increase. So it's based on the median income of the prior year, and it's state data that is utilized for those, and we can get you those updated numbers, Amanda. Yeah, council member. Yeah. Are the program we offer locally, or yeah?
The emergency home repair program is a forgivable loan over the term of 10 years. So if that homeowner resides in the home for 10 years, it is forgiven. There is a maximum lifetime benefit to that. I believe it's $20,000. Keep in mind that program is for emergency repairs, critical systems to the home to make it function. But you know, I guess going back to the forgivable loan, if they live there for 5 years, half of it is paid back. There's no interest that is accruing during that time. So.
Yeah, Scott.
You mentioned Pearl has a lot of tip lights.
Yeah.
Where can we get that data at a city basis?
How many districts are active, or?
Well, this is data. Pearl owns all its versus
Sure, I'm looking for Nick. There's Nick. Nick Murdoch is the Economic Development Director for the City of Perham, and you should have like I'm guessing you have an annual TIF report. Yep.
Is that put up publicly somewhere for each city, or?
I don't know if the state auditor might, but they have some aggregate data, statewide data, but Scott, I can connect you with Nick, and he can get you for okay. Yeah, but there'd be individual city level data that they would have, and they have number. I mean, what do you have for open TIF districts right now? We put you on the spot just for a scale. More 5 or 6. Okay. Historically, it's been a continually used tool in Perham. Pelican Rapids has a couple, I'm guessing. All right, 2 or 3. Not sure how many active in Fergus right now. 1, 2, 1, 2. Oh, the redevelopment, yeah, 2 or 3, 4, a few. And City of Ottertail has a few. Battle Lake has a few. Yeah, so there's a scattering. So we can talk about that. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Other questions? All right, and we'll have time for questions after our project kind of reviews here that we're going to walk through, so something else might get triggered. So, so with that, I'll invite Jay Paulson up to start with our first project, which is the Lincoln in Battle Lake. And maybe you want to just introduce yourself, and I'll hop over, and share just kind of a high-level overview of the project, where it is, and again, your background.
Hello. Hello, I'm Jay Paulson, owner of High Point Homes, a Battle Lake native.
Started in 1999, built over a couple hundred homes, product of K-12 in Battle Lake, grew up south of Clitheroe on a farm, and I've been very involved with Amy and Tanya in pursuing this project. And I'm a single family home builder, primarily build homes on water, so I'm not a robust developer. Did a 16 unit apartment in 2018 in Battle Lake, and then now this opportunity came around a couple years ago, and expressed my interest in it, and then worked with staff to get to where we're at, and we're under construction currently.
Hello? No? Oh, yep, we're on. Okay, sorry about that. Maybe I'll go back to the map here. So the project, and we'll go through in more detail kind of the timeline and action steps that happen to get this underway, but it's really, this is just to show it's, an infill project, about a ½ acre, so very small, and it is a redevelopment opportunity that is being leveraged into housing. Sarah, my clicker. All right, I'll just keep talking. So the site plan, thank you. The site plan here shows that, again, it's a tight site. It's about 10 units, or it is 10 units. It's not about, it is 10 units. Multifamily workforce housing. And workforce, I wanted to start with just what's the definition of workforce housing, because there isn't a common definition, but our working definition that we use, and that is used in a lot of funding programs, but it's what is housing that is affordable to the workforce of the community. And so that's our baseline in looking at what do the rents then need to be, because if you would have put rents in at that project projected that would cover the costs, for that income, it doesn't work. People would not be able to afford to rent them who are working within the community. So on a general basis. So wanted to just lay out that definition of how we think about workforce housing, and I think that's pretty common in how it's defined, but it is a little tricky because it's not a formula. I think sometimes we get caught up in some of those details, like with TIF, where it is very defined in what that means. So again, a 3-story building. I don't know if you want to talk about the project a little more and how it's designed.
3-story building, 10 units, so drive-in stalls on the parking lot side, 2 main floor units, then 4 over 4. It will have an elevator. The other apartment we did in 2018 did not have an elevator. And we have a mixture of people in their early 20s to in their 80s. So we get some on a waiting list that would want main floor living. So that was going to be my first build with an elevator. So again, education on what those cost, but it will be appealing for those wanting to be there. It's a block off of Main Street. It's 3 blocks from the high school, or K-12 rather. And so I think the location will be very appealing for multiple levels.
Great. So now, looking at the timeline. So back in 2022, the city had identified this This property, there was some interest in it from another user, but ultimately that transitioned to a different solution. And what the city did is incorporate the districts or the parcels that we're talking about into an existing tax increment financing redevelopment district that had been set up for the Hatchery Row project. Folks, if you've been through Battle Lake, probably are familiar with that project. And so what they did is expanded that geographic area of the district to include this as well as a couple other parcels. So that's where it kind of got on the radar when that other user, again, came up with a different solution. The opportunity was brought to the CDA and to see what our role might be. Ultimately, we bought the property, we cleared the site, and now here in 24 and 25, we worked with the developer in the city to put together the financing package for the project. And now, as mentioned, construction is underway to be open later this year for occupancy. So pretty exciting to see it move forward. So that's the high level overview from a timeline perspective, but wanted to dig into a little bit more about how did that happen? I mean, that sounds easy, right? Like, oh, there was some conversations and we bought the land and, got it ready. But it took more than that. And so that's where again, this is the CDA getting more involved directly with development, which we hadn't done in the first few years of our efforts towards housing investment. So we went into it thinking the CDA's role would be to ready this site for development. It had a blighted building on it, which is why it qualified to be in that redevelopment district. That functional use of that structure that was on there had met its lifespan. It was no longer, hadn't been kept up for many years and was really a blight on the neighborhood. So we worked with the city and the city's EDA to affirm what was the vision for that site from a type, what did the city want to see, what did the EDA see as need, and again, landed on that multifamily geared towards workforce. So that was back in 2022 and early 23 to make sure there was a shared vision for what the outcome of this project would be. So we did some due diligence, we tested for asbestos. There was asbestos in that old property, but we purchased it in the fall of 2023 and demoed the property, cleared, removed the asbestos before demolition, and got the site ready for development. So hopefully then a developer could see a vision for what could be on the site. So then with that cleared site, we issued what we called a request for developer interest. We didn't want to get too specific about what needed to go there. Should it be 10 units? Should it be 8 units? Should it be, what it should look like? We wanted to have the developers have that ability to express what they saw for the vision, but had those parameters of, it's going to be geared towards the area workforce. What does that mean? Who is the workforce? And talk to employers about, where they were hearing from their workforce in their housing struggles. So, so we did, issued that developer interest inquiry and ultimately approved an agreement between the CDA and the city and High Point Homes, which is Jay's organization, to, again, further define whose roles were what in advancing this redevelopment project. And that was back in February of 2024. So once we had that vision and that initial kind of site plan and scope from the developer, how was the project going to get financed? I mentioned already we worked with talking to employers. The two major employers in Battle Lake are the school district and the Good Samaritan Senior Living, and had some really good conversations with those two employers about where they were seeing struggles, what they heard from their staff. Maybe somebody would start, but then they were commuting from another area because they didn't have availability of local housing. Another piece to mention, when it was landed on that workforce housing, is Battle Lake looked at what had been built in the last number of years in the community, and where hadn't there been housing built? So there was senior-oriented rental, there was some new single family had come up, and then kind of a different product in the hatchery as well. So kind of a different tier of housing rental, but a different tier. So that was how they came, and they have done, as a community, a lot of housing planning work. They had, gosh, I don't know what year it was, 2021, looking to Val, when looked at the school district boundaries. So didn't just look at the city's boundaries, but did some survey work around the entire school district to understand, again, what were those housing needs and what wasn't being met locally. So they've really had that plan to help inform what the next type of housing might be that they're pursuing and trying to advance in the community. So then it got fun with financing. Fun with financing? Was it fun? Yeah. Anyway, it was, so what timeliness did work in the fact that Minnesota Housing opened up it's for Greater Minnesota, but it's a workforce housing funding program for Greater Minnesota for small communities with the intent of creating, again, that workforce housing. And so we worked with the city, who was the applicant to that, and submitted a funding application in April of 2024. So we worked really hard over those few months from when the developer was got fully engaged in the project to help figure out, what are the construction costs, estimating, knowing, construction wasn't going to start for a while because we needed to wait for a turnaround on this project, or on the application to Minnesota Housing. But did find out in September of 2024 that the forgivable loan was structured as a forgivable loan through the city that is provided to the developer through the time of construction. So that was a really important component to this project, because without that, again, to keep those rents lower than what would be needed to make the project cash flow on its own, it wouldn't have otherwise worked. So once we had that in place, and then we'll talk more about the overall financing structure in a bit, but then the developer did purchase the land at a market value. It didn't cover our costs that we put in to ready the site, but paid market value for the land itself, and then started construction. So we talked about the site design already as far as the units and how the building is going to be structured. But to get into the financing, maybe you want to give a little bit of your perspective, thinking about last April when we were trying to pull those numbers together, and then we can talk about the tax increment financing and how that's being leveraged here as well.
Sure. Tanya mentioning upcoming deadline, I can remember our deadline vividly at it was kind of ready, fire, aim a little bit. We kind of said high view estimates of what we think it's going to cost, and truly didn't really know until later in the fall when it's really going to happen. But we made some estimates and pursued that. As a home builder of 25 years, if you built 10 years ago compared to today, it's going to be double. So just the rents we're receiving aren't going to be double from 10 years ago. So the financing component of this is key for me or any other developer.
Yeah. So there are 4 primary financing or funding streams for this project. So had a lot of conversations with your lender, had a lot of, how will this work given the layering of financing. You're bringing owner equity into this, certainly. And then the Minnesota Housing funding, and then we also layered a loan from the CDA that Tanya mentioned a little while ago, the multifamily new construction loan program. And that is a flexible tool that we have that we can set the terms based on the project's needs. It has to show that it needs the funding because it is a 0% loan. And in this case, our repayment structure, and this is where the tax increment financing comes in, the rents aren't going to repay that loan. So just because of the structure of the deal. So we are using the future taxes generated, as a result of that tax increment financing district being in place, that are going to come to us as the CDA to make our loan payments on that. So we have to be a little patient for it to start and ramp up in value, and then be repaid over time for that. So in addition to our loan being repaid from the tax increment, we also have a component of those new taxes that are being paid to reimburse us for those expenses that I talked about earlier. So while the developer paid the market value for the land, we still have our expenses related to that asbestos remediation, demolition, and a little bit of carrying costs when we owned that piece of land. So we'll get paid over time, very patiently over time, reimbursed for those expenses that we fronted to make this project move forward. Yeah.
Similar to you, it's a marathon, not a race. It can't be it's not build it, we're gonna flip this and move. It's gotta be a long haul, build it. I believe in real estate, it's costing a lot now, but we said that back in 2018, we built the 16 units. So what's it gonna be in 5 to 10 years? It just never seems, costs never go down.
So, this is, an example of where we ask our communities to think about, one, know your needs, and we'll talk more about that later, but we want to keep hammering that home. Know your needs within the community, understand what your market is, and where are those opportunities. We're going to talk about redevelopment again in the next project that we're going to highlight, but that redevelopment tax increment financing really allows us to be able to pursue some of these projects and then get, recoup our investment over time, and for developers, or us acting as a developer. And so, and what is great is that often with redevelopment there isn't significant infrastructure. There might be some site needs, specific to the project, depending on its size and scale. But that public infrastructure, like every other cost that we've been talking about, has gone up over the last number of years, so further impeding new housing from getting built and other development happening. So just trying to use every tool that we can to help a project make sense and move forward in the community. Taking some of Ben's stat, which I hadn't seen, was it 50,000 impact of, so if there's 10 new residents or new folks living in Battle Lake as a result of these new households in Battle Lake as a result of this new apartment building, what is the impact to the community, to the school district, to those employers, to the retailers, to everybody in that community will have a benefit from this project. So we're going to use that number. We're going to quote you on it. I think we'll keep questions to the end, but anything else to add, Jay, on this project itself?
Yeah, specific to the community, the community leaders, and specifically Val, we're great to work with. Their progressiveness helps make that happen too.
Yeah, and so we did also have to fast track the planning approvals and the site approvals, again, to show readiness when we applied to that Minnesota Housing Program, which is highly competitive. I don't remember the dollars that were applied for, but it was multi times what was available for funding. And so again, that readiness and being able to demonstrate that you have the developer, the costs, you have the other partners in place, the project is approved from a city standpoint, that having all those pieces can help with the competitiveness of particularly those state dollars that are limited in availability. Yeah. Okay, thanks, Jay. I almost forgot the photos. So on the left is the rendering that was developed, and on the right is the project as of Monday. So the 3 stories are up, the roof is yet to go on, but it is moving forward very quickly. And just a couple other construction photos. So check it out, it's right off Main Street on Lincoln and Summit. Yep, so Summit would be off Highway 78. All right, so now we're going to shift to another area of the county, going over to Pelican Rapids, and really a totally different project in how it came to be, and but has some of the same components in how how it's happening. So shown on the map here, outlined in the purple, is what was the former highway garage property in Pelican Rapids. A new highway garage was built in the community to meet current needs, and I'm sure no one was at this property, maybe some of our commissioners were, but like they could hardly fit like a plow in the truck. It was built in the 50s or 60s, the structure that was on there. So a much more functional property, and again, in partnership, because we are aligned. Nick talked about the long-range strategic plan of the county. The CDA tries to fill a role in accomplishing some of those goals within the long-range plan. And so it saw that partnership of leveraging this property that was in a residential neighborhood to create new housing within a community. So again, this is a redevelopment, so we're going to talk about redevelopment. And it's about 3 acres. It's been platted into 9 single-family lots now. And in this case, the CDA is acting as the developer of the subdivision itself and is also constructing 3 single-family homes that will be sold on the site as well. So kind of 2 levels of involvement in that case. So our public infrastructure is in, and home construction is underway on this project. Just got some clicky actions. Okay, well, there's a plat in there. It's not very interesting. It's 9 lots. If you can bring it up, Sarah, yeah. So that's what it looks like going from that 3-acre parcel now to be platted. High-level overview of timeline. These conversations started actually in 2022, but the first real action happened in 2023 when the county conveyed that property to the Community Development Agency to act as the developer of the site. We also started applying for funding through Minnesota Housing, the impact fund that Tanya mentioned earlier, so we'll talk about that a little bit more and how it's supporting the home construction portion of the project. So it's, again, property's been platted. We were awarded some funding, which gave us some confidence to move forward and start those site improvements. I think was it at the housing summit? I'm looking to lands. Like, I remember we signed off on the infrastructure plans when I was here at an event. Anyway, so things got moving in 2024, and infrastructure was installed. We'll talk about how that happened, and then here we are today with new homes under construction. So to dive in again, like I said, we started in 2022, where this opportunity for an infill project here in Pelican Rapids was identified, and we talked to the city and said, is this something you want to take on? How might we best approach this? And the city expressed support for the CDA to be the lead in looking at, again, that single-family subdivision. I didn't go back all the way, but I went at least 20 years, and I couldn't find a new single-family plat in Pelican Rapids. Does that seem about right? Yeah. So 20 plus years since there had been a large, anything other than infill, new infrastructure for housing for single family. There's been multifamily built in Pelican Rapids quite a bit over the last number of years, but single family just hadn't taken traction. So this was of a significant interest to the city to get this moving forward. We also made sure that the tool of the tax increment redevelopment district would work, so we did an assessment up front to make sure all those qualifications that I mentioned earlier from state statute were met. There's a whole checklist of things that have to qualify, and we wanted to, again, make sure that we could leverage that financing tool as we move forward with the project. So once that land was transferred to the CDA from the county, we then started thinking the next step, which is how do we make sure homes get built on that site? Because there wasn't a strong market in Pelican Rapids, or there maybe would have been other projects coming forward, but it's hard to build single family. And so we were looking at the impact fund program through Minnesota Housing, and I'll let Tanya talk about that.
All right, so as Amy had I think previously mentioned, in 2023, the CDA became the proud owners of this site officially. When considering the application for the impact fund, we really dove into the data in our 2021 housing study, as well as the comprehensive plan that the City of Pelican Rapids completed in 2022. And what we found were those two key documents really reaffirmed the need for affordable single-family homes. And quite honestly, those were between the plan and the study, they were instrumental in forming our application for that funding. So the impact fund was, we submitted the application in July of 23 and it was awarded in December. But just a recap for those of you that are new to the room, but the interim loan funds provide working capital for the actual construction of the units, while the value gap grant covers the difference between the cost of development and the home's appraised value. Under the impact fund, your kind of minimum list price is that appraised value on the home. So that is, you gotta do the math, you gotta make sure it flushes out and there's enough funding at the end of the day to cover all those expenses.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. And those studies, well, maybe flipping to last year, 2024. So I'll walk through kind of what we got done. So we got that plat was put together, as mentioned. We actually formally established the tax increment financing district. If you recall, we verified it was going to qualify, but we wanted to wait until we were ready to start work on the site. So we could maximize, if needed, those years on that collection of the future taxes. So the public infrastructure is installed. There is still a final lift on the road that's needed. The city led the public infrastructure project. So they built it as a city public improvement. We, as the CDA, are paying for that cost up front. So we've been able to, over the last few years, pull together some cash reserves, so we didn't have to finance that project. The infrastructure alone is about $750,000 to build the road, curb, sewer, water, stormwater for those 9 lots. And so it's a hefty bill. We are not assessing that infrastructure to the lots because we, again, want to see them get built on, want to, again, targeting that entry level, a new housing product, a different housing product for the community to complement, the multifamily and other housing that was available. So we will be repaid by those future home taxes, which is why it was important for us to get those homes built and not just rely on somebody buying those lots and building their own. So we really wanted to be able to jumpstart that home construction, which was applying for that Minnesota Housing Impact Fund. There is an income component to the buyer of those homes, and also a restriction of resale to another income qualified homeowner. So really trying to keep that in the that, whether it's first time home buyer or a slight move up buyer for those units. So it also, just to express the timelines, when we love Minnesota Housing as such a key partner, you have to have some patience. So as Tanya alluded to, we applied in July of 2023. We were notified a board action from Minnesota Housing awarded the funds in December, but we didn't actually sign the executed agreements or execute the agreements associated with that funding until May of the next year. So you're at a 10-month window that you have to estimate the numbers of what is construction going to cost, what are values going to look like in a year to year and a half later, 2 years later in this case. So really being, again, prepared, know what well, it's hard to know what the market's going to do, but do your best in making those assessments. And Tanya does an amazing job. We are, right, for numbers that she put together in June of 2023, we're we're right on. So that's good. And in this time as well, in 2024, the city completed a more detailed housing study. So they had done the comprehensive plan in 2022, and then did that housing study, which we'll hear from the city in our next session, and how that has helped this. But what that study did do is we were laying out the floor plans and the type of housing product that it really affirmed what we were proposing to build for those first 3 homes in this project, aligned with what the community, continued to align with what the community demand was and what they were looking for. So with that, we also have engaged a real estate partner. So Andrew Yagi Real Estate is our partner on this project. The lots are listed for sale, and getting to 2025. So the lots are listed for sale, and we also did put out for bid for the construction of those 3 homes, and entered into that contract in April with homes under construction now on that. So again, that tax increment financing is going to, that tool, and then the future taxes associated that will be collected will pay back our infrastructure expenses as well as the demolition. And in typical form with redevelopment, there's something unexpected, and we did encounter some contaminated soils when the infrastructure was being installed. So that was an unexpected number, but that's again one of the reasons that redevelopment has this tool to be able to offset those expenses and make sure a project can move forward. So all said, with the infrastructure plus those other expenses, we're at about $850,000 of investment by the CDA just in the infrastructure and site readiness. The home construction, we did receive the interim financing, so construction loan is available through Minnesota Housing for the home construction if we choose not to, however we choose to finance that. So that's available as part of that award as well, so that we can, before we sell the homes, can pay for the construction itself. All right, so just a little some before and afters. I won't forget this time. So the top left shows the highway garage and what the site conditions were before, and then after the infrastructure was installed last fall, we got some drone footage there from our realtor, so showing how that cul-de-sac comes in to serve those 9 lots now. And then just another perspective, you can see the existing neighborhood around. So it was single family on 3 sides, or housing on 3 sides, single family on 2 sides, and then the other side is partially connected to a park, and the other part is a church property. So where the cul-de-sac bulbs there's actually going to be a walkway that'll connect to that city park that was existing, and so really a good connection for the neighborhood to access that public space. And then, like I said, construction is underway. The homes they are listed for sale right now. So if you know anyone looking for a home in Pelican Rapids, you can see Andrew or Lynette, who are here today with Andrew Yagi Real Estate, and get in early. But the homes should be ready this fall for occupancy. That's it. All right, so that's that project. And again, we'll keep your questions. We'll highlight one more project, and then again, we'll take some questions. So Donavan, if you want to come up. All right, so looking at Campus View Estates in Fergus Falls, and we have the developer Donavan Rogness with Rogness Contracting to review a project that they led in Fergus Falls. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
How's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. Is that, we're good? Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Donavan Rogness. I'm a Fergus Falls native, born and raised there. Went to community college for a couple of years, and then I moved up to Fargo to continue my education. I was up in Fargo, I was there for 12 years, learning a lot of the construction trade, building office buildings and apartment buildings and getting used to that. And then after my wife and I had our second kid, we decided that we wanted to raise our family back in a small community. And so we were just like Ben said. So we moved back, and then when we moved back in 2017, I was commuting back and forth, but I was also looking for opportunities in our community to develop or to do something. We kind of took some low-hanging fruit. We learned that there was a market for townhomes, and we had some land that was just on Cascade Street in Fergus, so that the infrastructure was already there. And so we started building some townhomes, and we found that the market was true. They were selling, and then we ran out of that land and tried to figure out what was next. I think that's kind of a common question, is like, there's no land available to build on, what's next? So meeting with Amy, we just started the discussion of what does it look like to develop something. And so in 2021 was when we engaged our process.
All right, so I think, just showing what the project is, you want to just talk about, as you worked to figure out what was next, how did you land, or how did Campus View Estates come to be, and kind of overview what the units and project is.
Yeah, sure. So again, Campus View Estates is a townhome, like a slab on grade housing development. We knew that there was a demand for those type of housing units where we're talking about workforce housing, getting people out of those houses and get them into something that they can live in more comfortably. And so when we started looking for land, we came across this stuff up on the north side of Fergus Falls. It was right on Park Street, so it's right between like the VA and where the Kirkbride building sits. And there was, again, I call it the low-hanging fruit because the infrastructure was already in place. So Park Street had the road, the curb and gutter, and the utilities were in the street. So we were able to start our development on that side and continue the momentum of selling homes. And then, is the next slide the time frame? Do you want me just to keep working through that kind of? Okay, so maybe I can do this so I can see it better. But in spring of 21 is when we started the talking with the county, Amy, and then talking with the city of Fergus Falls to get this TIF district established, knowing that we needed a funding source to help pay for infrastructure. So in fall of 2021 is when the construction actually started on that Park Street, and then in the winter of 21-22 is when we were able to finalize that TIF piece. Let's see, yeah, and then I think we missed one there, but yeah, and then spring of 22 is when we were able to put that infrastructure in. So what was so important about the connection and the partnership with the county and the city is when you're looking to develop some property, the infrastructure is probably the hardest thing to overcome. It's the cost, that's the first cost that nobody wants to pay. So for our project, we ended up, I think we got a pretty good estimate, but it was over $1 million to put in one road at a cost of $800,000 a foot. So those are the things that as a developer, like, who's going to take that risk on, right? Like, I can't go into, even though I love Fergus Falls and I want to see it grow, I can't take that risk on to put $1 million in and hoping that it's going to sell. So the partnership of the TIF district was super important, and that's kind of what we're talking about today. But that infrastructure was built and put on by the city of Fergus Falls, who then is able to make the payments on that through this TIF district. Could talk more about that in a minute here, but spring of 24, that's when we started the first rental units last year, and then the spring of 25, which is now, as of now, we've got 20 units of the for sale ones built, and 4 units of the rental. I probably didn't tell you what our overall project was, did I? Sorry. Our overall project, the scope of the work, we are in the course of 6 years, we wanted to build 36 4-home units and 12 rental units. So that's what we were getting ourselves into. and then hoping to be all done with construction by 27. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so this is the easy numbers breakdown of TIF for what I did. So ours is a what do we call it? Income, okay, so the housing TIF, not a redevelopment TIF like we just talked about earlier. So here's how this works, and here's what I learned throughout the process. If we've got a bare piece of land and we plat it out, so each now is an individual lot. If the lot has a tax basis of $500, and then we build a townhome on it, and now the new tax base is $3,500. There's a $3,000 tax increment. It's a gain that happens there. And so with that $3,000 gain, the city keeps 10% for admin costs, so we can take 90% of that and apply that back to pay for the special assessments. So our goal with that, so we would take that $3,000 at 90%, $2,700. We would be able to take that. The city takes it and works with the county directly behind the scenes, and the homeowner pays their property tax as normal. And then when they receive the check, the county and the city do their payment system. It's really kind of a nice deal for all the homeowners and the renters because they get to receive the benefit of the TIF district, but they don't have to do anything with it. So graciously, our county and our city handle all that stuff on the backside. But that's really what we saw as a value, because what happens is I think on each one of those lots we have a special of like let's say $35,000 on that. And we're living in a community that's already kind of tight to build houses anyway. So when you have to build an expensive house, and we're at $350,000, the last thing they want is another $35,000 of loan on top of their house. And so that's where we saw the benefit, is that we weren't going to do this development with taking on that extra risk. So the TIF project, the TIF district made that feasible for us.
Yeah, great, thanks, Donovan. So, Donovan is speaking about this project because he led it. He partnered with the city of Fergus Falls ultimately to get this district in place. We did have some of those early conversations to think about what is that financial structure. We talked about tax abatement and could it work, and it didn't work in this case. It wasn't the right tool to help this project move forward. So that's just an example. Wanted to bring one where we weren't so directly involved as the other examples, but how housing TIF can really help a community and bring 36? No, how many units?
48 all said that.
Yeah. So in a few years there'll be new, a lot of new housing, that move over housing, the patio home, also providing a different rental product that didn't necessarily exist in the community either. So similar products, if you drive through the neighborhood, you probably wouldn't tell which are rental and which, I know they have slightly different floor plans, but
from the outside
looks the same. Yeah. So, so that blend of housing product in one development, again, meet different needs of different people. So, anything else, Donovan? Otherwise, we can open up for questions.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. I don't know if Jay, if you want to come up or wait till you have a question that's directed to you, but questions about all that we've just talked about. Yeah, Jennifer.
So just curious, on the first project, what funding was used to purchase that property?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the question was, what funds did the CDA use to purchase and ready the site? We have a couple of funding sources that are available, or that fund the CDA's work. One is a portion of our Housing and Redevelopment Authority levy. So these were, because it was redevelopment, we used HRA levy dollars. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I have one question. So you were talking about infrastructure and kind of wanting to money for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you earlier in a couple of your projects talked about how the city and county had been kind of get together to streamline the permitting processes and that you were ready to go. How did you handle things like SAC-WAC? That's the piece I think that some of these communities really struggle with.
Sure.
So can you help answer that question?
Yeah, sewer and water access charges. Because I moved here from the Twin Cities where that drove everything. Our fees are much lower. I don't want to speak, know off the top of my head how much the sewer and water access charges are. Do you remember?
I don't know.
They're pretty nominal, so that's hasn't been a barrier. I don't even think it's, sometimes, is that right? Because it is gonna tax the system more and, but the property tax base will be there to help support those public infrastructure systems. So our cities haven't been, because we're not doing a lot of expansion of infrastructure. So part of that also adds the challenge of adding new infrastructure versus needing that funding stream to then further expand the systems. Does that answer your question? Yeah, it's not a barrier. I think that's the answer because they're fairly low on a per unit basis. Other questions? Yeah, me.
Okay, so the developers that went from single family to the multifamily, two questions. What was interesting and appealing about going to multifamily? What might have made it easier? And then I'm also wondering, do you manage the buildings or do you outsource the building management for the rentals?
Like both, because you want to talk about the rental townhomes and how you manage them?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so the rental townhomes, we manage those in-house. So we'll have a total of 12 units, which really isn't too unbearable for us. But
Yeah. And do you do snow and lawn for the ownership units too?
Yeah, so for our development, those 48 total units, like lawn care and snow removal is a part of an association fee. So that also is a draw to people because then they can sell their snowblowers. They've been doing that for enough years, and so yeah.
Yeah, I know, Jay, if you want to talk about the balance between single family and
Still a single family home builder. This is just in addition to. Oh, sorry. Still build single family homes, but this is in addition to. We will own and manage it and oversee it as well.
Were there hurdles or challenges going to a multifamily build or things that the city or county made it easier to do?
I look at it like a big house, so there's a few more steps to it, but didn't scare me too bad. And yeah, the county was great to work with as well.
And you have multifamily in Battle Lake already. I mean, so that was what, in 2016, 18? 18.
Yep.
So 2018 had already built a multifamily that he was owning and managing. So this will add to the portfolio in Battle Lake. Okay. Other questions? Thane and we'll go to Kevin, and then back. Yep.
Well, Jay, comparison from the hatchery, your water tower ones, and this one, where about the price range as far as per unit for renting? Is it just kind of looking to see?
We would be less than Hatchery Row. I'm not vividly familiar with that, but I know it's more. 2-bedroom and water station's probably just under $1,000. A 2-bedroom in the new builds would be around $1,250.
Thane?
So the projects in Battle Lake and Pelican, the CDA was the authorizing authority.
Yep.
So did the cities, they played a role, but was there inherent risks for the city? Or do you guys take on that risk?
Yeah, so in Battle Lake, I would say not really any risk to the city. We took on the acquisition and clearing of that blighted property, so that, that's what we did there. As far as preparing it, I mean, there might be implications from 10 new housing units. In Pelican Rapids, yes, in a way. I mean, that we were committed to paying for that infrastructure, so there isn't the risk of, like in the Fergus Falls example, the city bonded for that infrastructure. Is that right? Yeah. So they have a debt service that needs to be paid. Donavan has committed to building 6 units of housing per year to fulfill. Those homes will then pay taxes, which will pay the debt service, right? The risk is Donavan hightails it out of town and homes aren't getting built. I mean, so that would be the Fergus Falls example. In Pelican Rapids, because we're not assessing that infrastructure, we're paying cash for it. We didn't borrow on it. The city didn't borrow for it and have to be repaid by that future taxes. We are reimbursing ourselves, but there's not an official debt service that has to be met by the new homes, being the new taxes generated by new homes. But I mean, they would have to maintain the road. It's a new public road, so that's okay.
So why would a project? I mean, how does the CDA and the city or community collaborate? Like, how is one decided? Let's take on this project, or Or let you do that, or how does that go?
Yeah, I mean, it's conversation. Some of it's our capacity. I mean, we're tied up in Pelican Rapids right now. You know, until we start receiving some of those future property taxes back, you know, we use a lot of our cash reserves for that. So we'll need to build that back up over time as those homes are built and property taxes are being paid, and then we are repaying ourselves, which will afford us then the financial capacity to do another project. Our you know, very different numbers in Battle Lake. I mean, I think right now we're net, you know, about $20,000, $25,000. You know, so we received a land payment, so we did get a payment for the land, and now it's just recouping those demolition and asbestos abatement costs from, you know, again, the future taxes, but it isn't as much there. So our capacity is kind of what limits. I mean, you know, looking to Tanya, like, we're talking to communities about like 27 and 28 types of projects right now. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Kevin, you had your hand up.
My question is, well, first off, Ben's information shows people that Donovan's age aren't moving out of the area, so we're good with them over there. So that's my question really has to do with the one in Battle Lake. Were there income restrictions on the people that would be renting?
There's not income restrictions. That's kind of, again, that nuanced workforce housing, and that they don't require income. So because of the Minnesota housing funding, there is not, that doesn't require income pieces. We also had that CDA loan with the developer that was mentioned. That has rent components that will keep the rents at a rate that's affordable to a percent of income.
So the rent
limits. Mm-hmm.
But not income.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. Just a question. Or I think you had your hand up first earlier.
I'm just curious, on some of the state funding programs, how dialed, like, do we anticipate any shifts in that funding? I know the state budget is
Yeah.
like your 27, 28 projects, can they even know for certain that they will get funding in those years this early?
Sure. So we've, the question is around certainty of, you know, Minnesota housing projects or funding for projects into the future. So in the last month, I think Tanya's written 3 or 4 funding applications for a project that we're pursuing for 2026 construction. So, you know, when those funding applications are open, you know, we have to wait and see now about all of those for a project that the HRA is leading for affordable senior rental. And so we'll wait to hear about those. So just from a timing perspective, right? Hopefully we receive those fundings and we can construct in 27, and that's why I say then in 26, and then we'll look to 27, like, you know, yet this year, thinking about what's on the horizon. Always the uncertainty about what programs are going to be funded. We've been lucky the last couple of years, right? There was new programs, there was extra funding for housing in the 2023 legislative session. So that has made larger pots of money available. Hopefully those programs continue, but we know they'll be at lesser amounts as far as available funding statewide. Yeah, Lori?
Yeah, the market rate, how the markets or the workforce housing infrastructure grants. Those housing units do they have to be for rent only, or can they be for purchase?
You're talking about Minnesota housing public infrastructure grants? Yeah, that's a rental sale program with income requirements for both.
And then the other question is, if the city owns property, you know, they have to come up with a match, could they be looking at
Certainly Community Land Trust and West Central Community Action. I don't know if Missy's here today or not, but West Central Community Action does have a land trust that operates in Otter County, so they would be a resource to understand the financing mechanisms for that. All right, well, staff will stick around, and hopefully our developers will stick around after, but we have one more session that we want to get to, so please join me in thanking Jay and Donavan for sharing their perspectives. And then we'll transition to our last session of the day if Jordan and Beth want to come up. And I'll just fill some time here as we get situated. And I know we flipped over a couple slides here, but the activation idea of understand your community, understand those redevelopment opportunities. Who are the builders whose maybe capacity could be built up to be partners on these projects, and how to be thinking about that. So I'm happy to have a couple cities here representing about how they are helping think about housing growth in their communities, and I'll let you guys introduce yourself. But what we'll be focusing on is talking about the housing studies that they have recently completed in each of their communities. So that should be working. Okay, you're good, Beth.
Hi, I'm Beth. Oh, that's loud. Hi, I'm Beth Wussow. I'm the city administrator for the city of Corpus Prairie. I'm also our EDA secretary treasurer, so I guess I wear a lot of hats. So,
like most of our
right,
city
just
folks
like all of us.
Yeah.
My name, I could start rapping for you guys or something. My name is Jordan Grossman with really bad allergies. I work for a private nonprofit, Community and Economic Development Associates, acronym CEDA, and part of our role is to help small communities do big things. So a portion of my hours during the week go to serving as the City of Pelican Rapids Economic Development Director.
Yeah, thanks guys. So, we've all been working on this housing challenge and, wanted to think, get the community's perspective on how you're working locally to get the community talking about housing, get those community identified solutions to hopefully help share that with the audience. So, making sure that the needs that truly are there are being addressed. So we have kind of a summary of your housing studies. I don't know if you want to walk through, Beth, a little bit of the recommendations and the process, who you involved, how it came to be over the last year.
Oh, how it came to be over the last year. 18 months ago, we established our Economic Development Authority in Harpers Prairie. I knew nothing about EDAs, and it has been an interesting ride. So it's a big learning curve. But we established our EDA, we started having meetings, and one of the things we really wanted to focus on, other than business development and retention, was housing development. Harpers Prairie is kind of weird. We're kind of in our own little island way down here, and just about on the edge of Douglas County. So we are 17 miles from Alexandria. So we all know how big Alexandria is. It's like Fergus. It's just bustling, and then here's Harpers Prairie here. So we wanted to really try to get out there, shed a spotlight on our community, and really talk about what we need in our community. We know we need housing. They want people to work there, so we have people who are always hiring, and so we need a place for them to live. So, that's just about it, every community. So we started working on that, and we thought, okay, we really need to get a housing study going, otherwise it's gonna be hard to, tell a developer, hey, this is what we really need. So after looking at going through the housing study process, which was quite a few steps to that process, it was really fascinating actually. We did find out that over the next 5 years, we really need to develop, we need 10 to 12 new single-family homes, and we need 12 to 16 rental units. So I think all of us reach out to our communities and we talk to community members and people who are maybe interested in coming to our community. What I have found, because I'm the one who picks up the phone at the city hall, I get a lot of questions. Hey, we need a rental unit. Do you know, we have a home now, but we'd like to transition to, something that is slab on grade, just want to rent it, we're done owning our home. basic transitional housing. So we have a huge, huge need for that. People are always asking, or where can I build? Do you have a list of lots that are available? And so I think it's really important to know what you need and know what you have available. So when a developer comes in, they say, do you have something where, this is what I'm looking to build? I can say, oh yeah, this is exactly where I want to point you to. So that's what we found out from our housing study. So it was absolutely a great process.
I echo everything you said. I will say when I started with Pelican, all I heard was single-family homes, which definitely came to light with the housing study. But the model of slab-on-grade patio homes and the fact that those homes can serve as single-family homes, but also serve for people, I don't want to say aging in place anymore, Ben. I don't know what my term is. For people who are looking to stay within the community, age in the community, and open up their 4 or 5 bedroom house in town for new families to come in. In addition to that, the city of Pelican Rapids owns a decent amount of land. And this land has been marketed many ways over prior years. It hasn't had a lot of attraction. So it made sense that housing study was the next step to confirm what the city thought should happen with that land. And for me to have as a tool when talking to developers, that it's not just what the city council thinks. We actually have a professional study here and had a lot of community engagement involved in the process. And this is what we know is needed for our community.
Seems like we all think we know what we need, and maybe our longtime residents will tell you what they think we need, and that maybe isn't always the case. A lot of us, well, especially in our small communities, we kind of have this old mentality of, well, this is the way it's always been done, and boy, do I hate that one. And so you get a new group of people in, and maybe you form an EDA that has, a group of people who are all very different, come from different backgrounds, representing different aspects of your community, and they have great new ideas. And I think that's really important is we got to keep an open mind. We can't just say, nope, single family home, that's all we're going to have in our community. We don't want rentals, but come to find out that is what we need.
Yeah, I think you each had kind of a committee that led this work. You talked about you established the EDA. Jordan, I think you've been doing work to reinvigorate your EDA and kind of get some new membership and representation. Do you want to talk about that, maybe just how the committee's helped inform this process?
Sure. The EDA was around since '95 and started doing things in 2023. The part of the process with the housing study was to create a planning committee, essentially a local planning committee. So it was a few EDA members, one of our city council representatives on the EDA, and then community members who I often hear through emails, text messages, phone calls, like what's going on with housing, nothing's happening. Those were the people that I reached out and said, I think you need to be a part of this process. The steering committee, that's what it is. And they helped guide the housing study through the few months that it took to complete and had a lot of input from their perspective as maybe a business owner or a homeowner or a council member about what we want the results to be of the housing study and not just focus solely on census data.
Not just data, but really community informed?
Yep.
Yeah, so what are you guys doing now with those studies? Like, okay, so you have this thick, they're thick, I don't know, a lot of pages, but some really great information and so what are you doing with that information now? How are you actioning those recommendations?
Oh, wow, where do I start? So let me just say our EDA, they're very aggressive. And so when we have a very eclectic group. One of them's a school superintendent and one's a nursing home administrator. And we have, a few business owners. The brewery owner, that's important. Get your brewery owner on board. You have a place for meetings. I'm telling you, it's great. But let me tell you, they hit the ground running, and they are so persistent. And it really made me feel good that everybody they're ready to go. They jump on this EDA and they're like, well, here I am, give me something to do. And so they did. And they reached out to people who own maybe a business in a neighboring community and say, hey, we need a hardware store. Can you come and see our community? See what you can do in our community. We'll find you a place to build, right? Also, they're reaching out to developers that, maybe we see them developing something in another small community and wow, this is an impressive development. Would you think of coming to Parker's Prairie? I mean, you wouldn't think to reach out to those people. You think, they're gonna come to me. But developing housing and getting people in there, into your community, it's not like you should be riding in the passenger seat of the bus. You need to be driving the bus. I mean, you have to reach out and really engage all those people. And a lot of times they're gonna tell you no, and that's okay. But a lot of times they're gonna say, maybe I am interested. So what are we doing now? We are working with 2 developers on some fairly sizable developments. One will be duplexes, so up to 20 duplexes in this area. Now, Parker's Prairie has 456 housing units right now. So if we add another 80 housing units or 40 housing units in this one and another 30 in another, we could have 70 new housing units. So not only that, but we're seeing people who build single family homes, and all of a sudden we're seeing a boom in that, and I'm going, what is going on? Because Parker's Prairie for the last 10 years has been growing 1 housing unit per year. I mean, it's like, okay. So all of a sudden here we are, and in the next 1 to 5 years, we could, if all of this works out, potentially be increasing our housing units by 15%.
So that's a lot. Jordan, so taking that information, from the housing study, what is Pelican Rapids doing to action those recommendations?
I'm on the Minnesota Housing website 24/7. We are investigating some grant options. I think you've heard Amy talk in the past about what the CDA and county's development or investment in Pelican Rapids. If you're not familiar, Pelican Rapids is a stew. It's a very eclectic group of residents, 2,500 people, and our AMI is a lot lower than other areas in the county. So getting creative with our stacking of funding to be able to move forward with housing development. Currently 4 head deep in a grant application to Minnesota Housing and continuing to work on our local match. I think that's hard for a lot of small communities. Maybe they're bonded out because they've invested in a lot of other projects in the community, but housing is still something that's important. So utilizing our resources like the CDA, the matching, 100,000 available from the CDA for public infrastructure to help grow that local match, to ask for the largest amount that we can to make the most impact with Minnesota housing dollars. Otherwise, networking with developers, trying to tell the story of if you build it, people will come, I promise you, but also here's this housing study that confirms that.
And that's, we have the deep investment in our subdivision in Pelican Rapids right now, and one of the other intentions was to prove the market, to help then other developers have the confidence to move forward in Pelican Rapids, because it's hard. It is, and these are 2 very different communities, and both have great energy around the housing challenge and have really brought people together and moving forward, but really different communities. And it just, I think, shows the distinction of all of our communities. They are different. There are different opportunities, but you have to start with knowing what those opportunities are, what are the specific needs within your community, and then chipping away with what the resources are. Other stuff you guys want to add? I mean, just what, you've kind of talked about what this new housing will mean for your community, but any more on that, or other stuff to share with other communities who maybe haven't done a deeper housing study recently?
Yeah, I think if your housing study is pre-pandemic, you should probably get a new one. I think it's very important. It's a big investment financially, but any possibility of new housing being developed afterwards makes that financial contribution immediately for the study pennies versus what you're going to get in the future.
Yeah, and again, we have $5,000 planning grants that both these communities leverage to fund their studies, and then had a variety of funding sources that made up that the rest of the dollars.
Exactly, and you know, we started from zero 18 months ago, and we're trying to establish a revolving loan fund, and you know, here comes, we need to do a housing study, and well, what does a housing study cost? I mean, yeah, you know, it's gonna cost something, but for us, it was $13,450. And that's like, oh my gosh, that's what they're planning to cut our LGA next year. So, so how did we fund that? We had $5,500 in private donations to help us fund that. West Central Initiative, almost $3,000, and then the Otter County CDA Community Growth Partnership Grant was $5,000. So that covered it right there.
Good. Well, I wanted to, you guys are talking local, right? And it is important to get to the details at the local level. But on a countywide basis, we did do a needs analysis a few years ago now, but based on what we've seen get built and what those needs are, we're going to continue to focus on primarily 3 housing types from a countywide basis. That entry-level owner or active senior, help them move over, open up that workforce housing, and focusing again on that single-family housing stock because it isn't otherwise getting built. The homes in Pelican Rapids, I don't think I mentioned, they're 1,400 square feet. So they are a small home. There is an unfinished basement, knowing also the demographics within Pelican Rapids, multi-generational families, larger household sizes, really different than what we see in some of our other communities in Otter County. And generally rental is very hard to finance. So both workforce and senior rental from a market rate perspective, as well as affordable, both senior and general occupancy. The senior rental model that we are looking at countywide is to help people stay in their communities where they have those connections. We opened in December through our HRA 6 units of affordable senior rental in Dalton, one of our smallest communities, partnership with the city there, and that's been really successful. We've had folks move out of their single families. We've had folks come back to the area where they do have family and support as they age. So we're looking to repeat that model in other communities. So, those are as we look overarching, also on a countywide basis, where should we be focusing our resources and capacity? I know we're bumping up against the noon hour, so we had some other information we were going to talk about on just understanding the affordability levels within your community, and back to that, right, the challenge of getting affordable housing that is affordable to your workforce. We will send these slides out. This is Otter County information, jobs in demand, what those wages are to afford, a median sale price of a home, and that's not new construction, that's our existing. What do we need to ensure our workforce can be in affordable housing, as well as all of our population. Another chart that just shows the cost burdened people who are paying up to 50% of their income towards housing, which we know then cuts into, as also was referenced by Ben, their medications, their food, reinvestment into that housing unit. So just always wanting to keep that on the forefront and on top of people's minds, that there are affordability challenges that, 10 years ago, it might have been come to Greater Minnesota for affordable housing. That's really, really changing in the current times. So with that, I'll open up to questions for our panelists about their work in housing studies. Questions for them? Yeah. No questions. Good job, guys. And so just in our closing slide here, right, I mean, our approach to this work is to be additive, support our communities with where their opportunities are, where their goals are, help them identify and activate those opportunities into new housing investment, and really to help everyone find home here in Otter County. And with that, just a reminder, there is a resource table in the back. And as well, if you enjoyed what you heard today, we do quarterly virtual convenings that if you're not signed up for and getting a calendar invite for, there's sign-up sheets at the resource table. So we encourage you to sign up and you'll be communicated with on those, where we do take a deeper dive into current programs or opportunities, as well as project highlights on a quarterly basis. So check those out. And thank you all for coming. Please enjoy lunch in the Ottertail area. There's a number of places open for lunch. So please consider that on your way out. But again, appreciate everyone's time today in talking about this issue. And we are available for follow-up, and we will send a follow-up communication with the slide deck and other information. So thank you all. Enjoy your day.